Chapter 521. Bold Assumption on the Ocean. Pirates had three iconic common interests: liquor, women, and gambling. Alger Wilson merely took out his silver pocket watch, flipped it open, and knew where he should go first. At 11:15, the brothels and bars hadn't opened. Only the gambling dens would have easily gathered a bunch of people who wanted to make a fortune. Alger was more familiar with this port city than his tiny hometown. He proceeded without stopping at all while he navigated his way, smoothly turning at every corner until he arrived outside a casino that was located in a secluded alley. According to what he knew, the owner of this casino was a gang leader with a deep background. He had an inexplicable but indistinct connection with the important figure at the Governor General's office. It was the first choice for many pirates to purchase and sell their stolen goods. Because of this, pirates often appeared here. They might exchange their loot for gold pounds in the morning, but they would lose everything at night and get thrown out. Alger pulled on his thick brown coat, pressed down his cap, a piece of fashion where that came from the mainland, and pushed open the half-closed door. Under the watchful gaze of the bouncers, he entered the casino. Casinos were prohibited within the Lone Kingdom. They could only be attached to bars as rooms, but in the kingdom's vast overseas colonies, not only were they legal, but they were also a mainstay industry. Among them, Byam of the Rorstad Archipelago and Aildi of East Balam were the most famous in the area. Many tycoons would specially visit them from Backland or mid-Seashire's coast for a big day of gambling. Surveying the area, Alger saw a variety of card games, as well as dice-derived turntable games. As it was still early, there weren't many gamblers, and Alger quickly scanned them all. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he instantly recognized the identity of a disguised person. He took off his hat, walked up to a Texas poker table, and patted his target's shoulder. He bent down and whispered into the man's ear, "Blazing." Danitz happened to be flipping the corner of his card with his right hand, so he almost jumped out of his skin from the slap and nearly sent a fireball towards the guy behind him. After he had been attacked by Steel Mavady, he knew that he shouldn't seek out information with his true appearance, as he could be targeted by greedy pirates. Although most pirates weren't strong and didn't register as a threat to Danitz, he still didn't want to reveal himself, lest it set back the plan of hunting Steel Mavady. However, to his surprise, the disguise he took great effort to don was exposed just an hour after he left home. He turned his head quickly to the side and glanced through the corner of his eye at the person who had greeted him. When he saw the signature seaweed-like dark blue hair, Danitz relaxed a little and turned to observe if the other players had heard the greeting. The gamblers were all carefully studying their hidden card, either folding or continuing, with none of them paying attention to what was happening over at his side. "Why are you here?" Danitz asked casually. He and Alger had met at the previous private meet, and he knew that the other party had a ghost ship and a dozen sailors. He was quite a powerful but unknown fellow. According to Vice Admiral Iceberg's judgment, if such a small and weak pirate crew was able to retain an ancient ghost ship, it meant that they were backed by a powerful faction. Perhaps they were members of the Church of Storms, or perhaps they were related to a particular pirate king or secret organization. They usually disguised themselves as ordinary pirates and gathered information for who they were really loyal to. It was easy to wipe any traces of themselves clean at scheduled times, and at times, do things inconvenient for the power backing them. For example, silencing others or plundering certain special items. There were quite a few pirate crews like this, and no one would particularly be bothered about such matters. Alger pulled over a nearby chair and sat down. He tilted his head and asked in a low voice, "I heard that your captain obtained Death's Key?" Danitz snorted with a laugh. "I thought you had a brain, but you've disappointed me. How can such a thing be so easily obtainable? We'll definitely sell it if you want it and offer a decent price. How about it? Do you want to consider this deal?" Alger casually said, "Perhaps it has other secrets. Maybe someone wants to deal with your captain. Who knows?" Dogs hit. Annoyed by his new hand, Danitz cursed it out loud. Then, he suppressed his voice and said, "That thing doesn't seem like a creation made by humans. It might belong to the giants or devils." "Creation? Your captain still insists on teaching language to all of you?" Alger asked with amusement. The rumor was that Vice Admiral Iceberg was a woman who was very strict when it came to knowledge. She couldn't stand the sight of a bunch of illiterates under her command, so every day on the Golden Dream, there was a class of general knowledge and reading, and every day she forced the crew to take turns participating. Wishing he could forget it, Danitz said, "It's much more difficult than fighting. Because of this, We're usually unable to recruit enough crew members. Every time we dock at the port to resupply, there will be people who resign. He didn't continue with the topic. Looking at the dealer, he said to himself, help me keep an eye out for Steele's whereabouts. Steele Mavati? Admiral of Blood's second mate? Alger looked down at Blazing's left arm, to seek revenge, which was slightly propped up with a splint, guessed from the other's tone and request. Were you attacked? For the key. Danitz smiled. His brain has already been eaten by his zombies, looking as though he was concentrating on his new hidden card. Alger thought for a moment before saying, the last time your captain appeared was 7 days ago, near Sonia Island. This was confirmed by a telegram. The Golden Dream wouldn't arrive in Byam that quickly. Do you have a new helper? If it's just you alone, then you aren't a match for Steele even if he were alone. And as you know, he's always attended to by a crowd. Towards Alger's question, Danitz's response was to throw out a chip. Call. Who is it? Alger first assumed that Danitz's attitude was a tacit agreement. He pinned his hopes by asking since it was a riskless endeavor. Danitz stared at the exposed cards and answered simply, you wouldn't know. I wouldn't know? Someone who has the strength to deal with Steele Mavati should be someone with a little fame at sea regardless of if they're a pirate or an adventurer. Unless they belong to a specific secret organization, or it's their first time traveling the seas. Of course, it's also possible that Danitz doesn't wish to answer, for fear of exposing a secret. That's most probable. Someone belonging to a particular organization, first time traveling the seas, with the strength to deal with Steele Mavati. Alger looked up slightly as he suddenly had a bold guess. He tapped on the edge of the table and asked, as if he were chatting about the weather, was Bansi Harbor fun? He emphasized the word fun. Danitz turned his head in surprise and blurted out, how did you know? He believed that with the Church of Storm's style, it was impossible for it to air dirty linen. Furthermore, the passengers of the White Agate had just arrived last night. The people who had witnessed the developments had all signed confidentiality agreements. So how could the news spread so quickly? Alger smiled without answering. At this moment, he understood the value of Emperor Rozel's words. Boldly hypothesize and carefully verify. Danitz put away his winnings and muttered, it's no big deal. There was a revival of some ancient customs that led to the fall of a storm bishop. As expected. Alger chuckled and said, I'll help you keep an eye out for Steele. But how can I contact you? 15 Amiris Avenue is an unoccupied house. Write the information on a piece of paper and throw it in, Danitz answered hesitantly. Alger nodded and stood up while patting Blazing Danitz on the shoulder. Don't forget my payment. He turned around and walked towards the door. Watching the captain of the ghost ship depart, Danitz couldn't help but grumble. This fellow isn't bad. However, I have to leave this place too. He couldn't quite trust Alger. Perhaps in a few minutes, he might lead Steele Mavati and his pirates to rush over. After leaving the casino, Alger, who was wearing a pair of local baggy pantaloons, strolled down the street. He entered a department store and found a counter. He smiled and took out a handful of bronze pennies. Give me a deck of tarot cards. While he was waiting, he leisurely thought of a question. What is the adorer of Mr. the Fool doing at this time? In Old John's restaurant, Klein watched as the waiter placed a plate of grilled fish in front of him. It was wrapped with something that looked like straw and covered with all sorts of spices, some of which he didn't recognize. The strong aroma seeped into Klein's nose and greatly enhanced his salivation. As expected of the Spice Archipelago, Klein was about to pick up his knife and fork when he saw the waiter place two things resembling tree branches on his plate. Chopsticks? Klein was shocked. Then he quickly locked on to the suspect, Roselle Gustav. This is the kind of cutlery you have to use when eating grilled stickleback. It's said that Emperor Roselle gained inspiration from the customs of the elves, the waiter introduced. The customs of the elves? They are indeed a race that likes cooking and eating delicacies. Or rather, it's purely an excuse Roselle came up with. Klein guessed, largely as a result of his understanding of that particular person's character. In the morning, he had gone to a few church hospitals in Byam to provide hospice care for some dying people, to help them fulfill their wishes, and to engage in a deeper level of acting, but he had failed to find a suitable target. This wasn't to say that no one died in the hospital, but rather it was that they all had relatives who either accompanied them or had witnessed their deaths. There was no possibility of disguising himself as the deceased apart from giving people a fright. I'll head to the bar where adventurers gather. There should be many foreigners who might die in a dark corner like stray dogs in order to pursue wealth at sea, while their families might never hear of them again. Klein suppressed his thoughts and focused on his delicious food. Chapter 522. Colony. The quality of Sickleback's meat was certainly not as good as that of Murloc meat, but the spices synergized to form clear layered flavors which Klein was rather delighted to have tasted. He just couldn't stop himself from eating after the first bite. Actually, there are some local beyonders who wish to leave this dangerous circle and lead a normal life. It's completely possible for them to head to Backlund and open a roasted cuisine restaurant, selling grilled fish as their specialty. With the city's acceptance for many things, their business definitely wouldn't be bad. The only problem is that many spices aren't as cheap as they are here. The cost will be very high, and a location has to be chosen to cater to the target group. Klein put down his rather crude chopsticks and wiped his mouth with a napkin, letting his mind wander. In his view, commoners were unable to find the means to get rich, mostly because they didn't have enough vision. However, one's vision was also limited by the education they received and their daily experiences. Bound by social class, it was really hard to escape from it and break through this limitation. The most effective way was to strive for a higher level of education, and the second was to take risks and head out on an adventure. Of course, the risk was huge, and many people vanished silently while taking this path. Klein spent 2 soldi and 5 pence for this meal, which wasn't cheap, but he had always been willing to spend money on good food. Besides, his main expenses had been paid for by Danitz recently. Pulling at his collar, putting on his hat and holding his black cane, he walked out of Old John's restaurant, just in time to see a police officer driving a tramp out of the street. The natives of the Rörsted archipelago had darker skin than the people of the southern continent. It was close to the kind of bronze which was often a result of exposure to the sun. Their hair was mostly dark and naturally curled ever so slightly. They were quite different from the colonists from the Lone Kingdom. It has been less than 50 years since the place had been completely colonized. At first, the natives would never have local kings and chieftains figures under the name of the Mid-Sonia Company to extract economic benefits, kiss the soles of their shoes, but later, and the management of the company quickly fell into corruption as they fought for power, who weren't even members of provoking the enemy for personal gain by starting a war. Although most of them came from noble families, what was even more absurd was that they would report any inheritance rights, claiming that their competitors had received bribes. The king and the prime minister agreed to redeem the stock. They would find a member of parliament backing them, and to send their fleet and troops to take over the Rörsted archipelago in full force, something that nearly resulted in suits. At present, the archipelago was governed by the Governor-General's office, Parliament, and the courts. The upper echelons were all Loanese, and some of the middle-ranking personnel were members of Parliament and court magistrates who were descendants of the original kings and chieftains. As for the low-ranking positions, they were open to the educated natives of the region. This included police officers below that of superintendents. It was a native policeman who was driving off the tramp with a baton, and his target similarly was of distinct Rörsted descent. As soon as the policeman saw Klein in his double-breasted frock coat, half-top hat, and black, civilized cane, he immediately put away his baton, straightened up, held his feet together, and saluted. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I help you?" Klein felt mixed emotions as he gently nodded. "Are there no carriages here?" According to the regulations of the Governor-General's office, carriages aren't allowed to enter this street. "You'll have to walk to the street ahead," the policeman explained with both fear and enthusiasm. "Thank you." Klein casually praised him. "You speak good Loanese." The policeman was so pleasantly surprised that he became excited. I think that this is an essential quality that a good policeman should possess." He originally wanted to say that he felt that he too was Loanese, but he was afraid the gentleman across him would end up angry. Klein secretly sighed and slowly walked to the corner of the street. Along the way, he saw that the local style of clothing was very different from that of mainland cities such as Backlund and Tingen. It was even different from ports such as Demir and Bansi, which had been colonized for more than 200 years. A decent man from Lone, dressed in a formal suit, wearing a top hat and a tie, and holding onto a civilized cane. This made the people around him subservient, afraid to look him in the eye or touch him. The rest of the natives or mixed bloods liked matching a thick jacket with baggy pants, along with a cap from the mainland. They didn't like black, and they preferred the colors brown, tawny, and light gray. To Klein, this was indeed a little strange, but it also gave him a feeling of coming to a foreign country. Of course, the natives of higher standing and those of mixed blood also mimicked the dressing style of Lone, believing that this was a sign of civilization. 2 p.m. Swordfish Bar, an accepted gathering spot for adventurers. There weren't many customers, so Klein easily made his way through the tables to the bar. He discovered that what was different from the other places was that there were 3 blackboards on the side of the bar that were supported by wooden shelves. Sitting on them were yellowing notices in white, with a variety of content, strange and varied. Some were hiring bodyguards, some were seeking help in finding people, some were investigating the situation on a particular island, and some were offering a high reward for the head of a particular pirate, while others claimed that they had obtained a treasure map and wanted to form a team. In short, the affairs that had been divided up between the private detectives and security companies in the Lone Kingdom still belonged to the adventurers here. A glass of Zaha. Klein tapped the surface of the bar counter. It was a local malt beer, cheap and tasty, with a unique taste. It was loved by adventurers, something Klein had learned from blazing Danets. 3 pence. The bartender casually glanced at the customer, not showing any change in his attitude because of the stranger's unfamiliar face. With a beer in hand, Klein sat in a high chair in front of the bar, sipping bit by bit as he quietly listened to the drinkers around him. Through their conversations, he searched for a worthy target. After nearly an hour, when the number of people in the bar increased, Klein finally heard something that might be useful. His spirit was jolted and he became increasingly focused. There were 4 people sitting at the table less than 3 meters away from him. They were feeling sorry for a man named Went. I always thought Went was out at sea. I didn't expect him to be at home. He's very sick. Sigh, if I had knocked on his door 2 days earlier, he wouldn't have died. You don't know how terrifying the room was. Mushrooms were growing on his body in huge swaths of white. Dogs hit. Stop it. Can't you see I'm eating sausages? Yes, yes, yes. Went's room was filled with bugs, moths, flies, butterflies, bees, and cockroaches. Holy Lord of Storms, I couldn't believe this was a place where a human can live. Even the police who came later were stunned. As the conversation passed into his ears, Klein slightly frowned, feeling that Went's death wasn't normal. Within a few days of his death, his corpse was already filled with mushrooms, and insects were crawling all over the room. Something beyonder related? With such an anomaly, the police would definitely report the matter to the mandated Punisher team. It sounds like it happened 3 or 4 days ago. The things that needed to be taken care of should have been dealt with already. Klein seriously considered whether he should pay a visit to take a look. At the very least, the man called Went was a lone adventurer in Byam. None of his peers wished to help him transmit the news of his death. After listening for a long time, he gained a rough idea of where the place Went rented was. It was at the nearby 47 Blackhorn Street. Having finished drinking the last drop of the Zahar beer, Klein put on his hat, left the bar, and headed for the apartment. After entering the door, he half closed his eyes and murmured to himself, "The room that recently had someone die in." He repeated the statement 7 times in a row, used his cane to quickly and easily arrive outside the room where Went used to live. It hadn't been rented out yet, and the anomaly inside had already been dealt with. There seemed to be nothing wrong with it. Klein put away the note he had used to open the door, locked the door behind him, and walked around carefully. After confirming the situation, he took out extract, essential oils, herbs, powders, and special candles, and he quickly set up a spirit channeling ritual in front of the bed. Although it had been several days, making it only possible for him to obtain the most superficial, disjointed and remnant bits of information, Klein thought that it was better to have some than nothing. Without a doubt, he prayed to himself and entered the space above the gray fog. He responded and gave himself the power to channel the spirit. The flame of the candle suddenly soared, tinged with a ghostly blue as it swayed. Klein only felt everything fall silent, as if he had entered a realm that didn't belong to reality. His pupils were completely black, and even the whites of his eyes had been expelled. He no longer needed to use the technique of dream divination. Having advanced to faceless, with the help of the gray fog that made an initial entry into the real world, he was able to directly see the lingering spirituality of Went, a will that refused to dissipate. There were 3 scenes. One was of a tall, thin, dark, curly-haired, sharp-featured Went coming to the body of a discarded corpse, astonished to see a glimmer from it before it condensed into a green gem filled with an aura of vitality. The second scene was of Went lying on his bed with his eyes closed, his mouth slightly open. His skin was covered with mushrooms of all kinds, the surrounding cockroaches and moths piled on top of each other, and on his chest, a silver necklace embedded with the same green gem from before. The third scene was of a pretty girl with flaxen-colored hair sitting at the edge of the sea with her eyes slightly moist. Lingering around her was Wen's reluctant voice. "Rain, I'm about to die. I'm really regretful that I never told you that I love you. I want you to marry me." The picture shattered, and the spirit channeling came to an end. Klein looked around and saw that the house was still dark and gloomy. "This fellow is truly unlucky." Klein shook his head and sighed. He already had a rough idea of the cause of Wen's death. His random act of picking up something. The vast majority of Beyonders didn't know about the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility, and they had never thought that the deceased of their kind would be able to release a characteristic that could become an ingredient. As this process was relatively slow, it was easy for them to be missed. Therefore, after killing a Beyonder, they would usually search the corpse and throw it away, making passers-by like Went to luck out or some other creatures at the bottom of the sea or in the wilderness. Went didn't know that it was a Beyonder characteristic, and he had thought it to be a magical gem. Thus, he made a necklace and kept it close to his body. Slowly, he was corrupted by the influence and died in agony. Chapter 523. Cooperation. By the time he left 47 Blackhorn Street, Klein had figured out Went's general situation. He had disguised himself as a police officer and learned from Went's neighbors. Simeem Island, the island at the farthest end of the Rørsted archipelago. From Byam, it'll take 4 to 5 hours to get there by liner, and there are only 2 trips a day, at 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., respectively. Went's parents are long dead and he has no relatives. The only person involved is a girl he just can't forget, Rain. She's the perfect target for my first performance of acting as someone else. But just thinking about how I need to confess on Went's behalf, it feels so awkward. If the girl agrees. Damn, how am I supposed to wrap things up? Klein thought with a troubled expression. He tried to recall the novels he had read and the movies and TV dramas he had watched, hoping for the most perfect solution. Soon, he had a general idea of what to do, stabilizing his mood in the process. His thoughts began to drift towards the matter regarding Steel Mavedi. I hope Miss Magician will get a radio transceiver as soon as possible. Klein sighed silently and got onto a rental carriage. Backlund. Cherwood Borough. Furs opened a letter Zio had brought back. It came from the science fiction novelist, Avil, who was pleased to share with Mam Wall the future development and applications of radio technology. Furs directly skipped over the beginning and middle content, her eyes sweeping over to the end. He introduced 3 types, with detailed addresses and approximate prices. The most expensive is just £12. Furs nodded slightly, feeling that this wasn't a very important business transaction. She suddenly felt her self-esteem was a little inflated. Perhaps because she had seen so many hundreds and thousands of pounds transactions in the Tarot Club, she no longer paid much notice to anything in the range of £10. Mr. World has the resources and finances. In the future, I might need to buy items from him or sell things I don't need. Yes, I'll just add postage, my transportation costs, and the price of the materials expended for the ritual to the original price. Furs made up her mind quickly, and she subconsciously looked out of the window. Backlund was still gloomy and dark, with a light drizzle pattering down. However, the fog wasn't as thick as it was before. I wonder when I'll receive the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch from the sun. Furs couldn't wait to advance. In the Berg household in the City of Silver. Having already prepared the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch and the materials Mr. Hanged Man wished to acquire, Derek was in no hurry to sacrifice them to Mr. Fool. He planned to wait a little longer, until the chief was leading an expedition team or was presiding over a particular sacrificial ritual, before making an attempt. This is the safest and most reliable way. Yes, be careful, be cautious. Derek reminded himself before flipping open the Giant King's Court, Book of Blackrock, hand-copied edition. Recently, he had been reading this ancient tome. From it, he was able to understand some of the faces of the Giant King's Court from ancient times. According to the ancient tome, it was a court of God. Time seemed to have frozen there, as though it was suspended in eternal dusk. All the buildings were extremely grand and magnificent, even reaching into the clouds. Humans who walked inside were exceptionally small, and they revered the owner of this scene from the bottom of their hearts. Backlund. Hillston Borough. Waymandy's house. After listening to an explanation, Emlyn White combed his hair with his hand and intentionally asked, "Lord Baron, I forgot where I heard it from, but there was a very famous city named the City of Silver during the second epoch or in the early half of the third epoch. Wei Mandi was a vampire baron whose age exceeded 200 years. He didn't look old, and he instead looked like a mature gentleman in his early 30s. His black hair was neatly combed back, and he was wearing a dark red cotton shirt with a brown pipe in his hand. As he enjoyed the warmth of the fireplace, he said thoughtfully, "No, at least in my memory, there's no City of Silver before the cataclysm." Before Emlyn could even revel in his joy, Wei Mandi went on to say to himself, "But there was a kingdom of silver which was originally ruled by the giant king's court and later came under its jurisdiction." Kingdom of Silver? Emlyn White thought for a while and said, "Lord Baron, is there anything more specific?" Wei Mandi looked up at him, smiled, and said reminiscently, "The Kingdom of Silver had a rather special position in the giant king's court. They didn't directly believe in the giant king, Ormer, and instead, they believed in the giant king's court's queen, Omabella." City of Generosity. Biome. Dock Area. Acid Lemon Street. Wind of Azure Inn. Klein stood at the corner of the street, undid the topaz pendant on his left wrist, and divined to ensure that there was no danger ahead. With that in mind, he strolled back to the inn, went up to the third floor, and opened the door of the luxurious suite. He was slightly surprised to find Blazing Danitz already back, slumped in his reclining chair, drinking. After a moment of consideration, Klein calmly asked, "What time is it?" "Isn't there a clock?" Danitz muttered. He looked at the wall opposite him and read out the time. 3:40 p.m. Before he finished his sentence, Danitz suddenly came to his senses, sat up straight, and laughed dryly. "I've already gone to the places I can get information from and asked the people I can ask. There's no need to stay outside any longer. It will increase the risk of exposure and affect your hunting plan." Klein found a chair and sat down, and he expressionlessly said, "Tell me what happened. What problems could there be?" "Although I'm mainly an adventurer who hunts treasure, I'm also a qualified part-time pirate." Danitz felt that his abilities had been insulted. After being swept by Gehrman Sparrow with a cold glance, he smiled and gave a brief overview of the places he went, the people he met, and the news he had heard from the morning and afternoon. Hearing Danitz sigh that a captain of a ghost ship named Alger knew about Bansi Harbor, Klein suddenly wanted to frown. With Mr. Hanged Man's relationship with the Church of Storms, even before I controlled the world and actively mentioned it, he didn't know about the anomaly at Bansi Harbor, so how could this Alger have known? Is he some powerhouse of higher standing in the Church of Storms who's disguised as a pirate, or someone who has some sort of relationship with the heretics in Bansi Harbor? Mr. Hanged Man has been active in the surrounding seas, so there's a possibility that it's him. Klein's heart stirred as he recalled the characteristics of the Hanged Man. Above the gray fog, although he couldn't clearly see the other members' appearances, it was still obvious as to whether they were men or women and what their hair color was. Klein raised his hand to stop Danitz from speaking. He said in a low voice, "Very messy hair, dark blue in color? You know him? That guy isn't simple." Danitz sighed. "As expected. Heh, I really didn't expect to meet him so easily." Klein didn't respond. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "Continue." Without thinking too much into it, Danitz gave a general description of what happened afterward and explained himself. "As you know, no one can be sure when they'll get anything when trying to get information. After finding everyone who could be found, the only thing one can do is wait patiently. This will definitely take a while." "There's another solution that doesn't require waiting," Klein deliberately said in a flat tone. "What solution?" Danitz asked in surprise. Klein nudged his gold-rimmed glasses, the corners of his mouth curving into a smile. "Use bait." "Bait?" Danitz looked at him, momentarily puzzled. In just a second, he had come to his senses. Only he could be the bait. As for fishing for the enemy, no one cared if the bait was actually swallowed or not. One only cared if the prey could be pulled out. Simply put, bait was a highly risky species. Haha, that's not a great solution. Yes, that's what my intuition tells me. I should be able to gain something from the Red Theater. I'll go over there to take a look. Danitz took his coat as he eagerly rushed out the door. Klein originally wanted to tail far behind Blazing and see if he could find any clues, but suddenly he heard layers of illusory prayers. It came from a man. Klein paused thoughtfully and turned into the washroom. 10 seconds later, he appeared above the gray fog. He saw the crimson star that represented the hanged man constantly burgeoning and shrinking. As expected, Klein sat down, leaned back in his chair, and emanated his spirituality. The voice of the hanged man became clearer. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I'm currently instigating a key related to Vice Admiral Iceberg. I met Blazing Danitz at a casino and learned that he was a witness at the anomaly in Bansi Harbor. I also learned that he plans to join forces with a powerful figure to deal with Steel Mavadi. I suspect that Blazing Danitz is working with your adorer, so I've prayed to you. If this is indeed the case, and if he wishes to receive a certain degree of assistance, I can be of some help." Mr. Hanged Man has indeed guessed Gehrman Sparrow's identity. He likely only had his suspicions, but he successfully obtained verification by inquiring about Bansi Harbor from Danitz. This is also good. With the help of an experienced local, the plan to hunt Steel Mavadi would be much smoother. Unless it directly affects the fool, there's no meaning for the hanged man to entrap an adorer. Judging from his expression and attitude, he doesn't have any suspicions towards the fool yet. I didn't leave any loopholes. Klein's thoughts raced, and he quickly made his decision. After making a divination, he conjured the world and covered the dummy with fog. He placed him in a praying stance and answered solemnly, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I am in need of some assistance." After finishing this scene, Klein threw the voice along with the scene into the crimson star symbolizing the hanged man. Chapter 524. Meeting 5 p.m. Olive Tree Avenue, Pam's Divination Lodge. Alger Wilson pushed open a brown wooden door with panes of glass situated above it, and he entered the cafe that had a mysticism theme. He ordered a cup of Fermo coffee from the Paz Valley on the Star Highlands of the southern continent. He took out the tarot cards he had bought earlier and placed it beside him. The top card was the Hanged Man, depicting an angel hanging upside down with his hands tied behind his back. Unlike this morning, he had changed into a dark, classical robe and wore a clergyman's beretta, like a warlock or magician from folklore. After taking in a silent breath, Alger slowly sipped his coffee. He didn't show any anxiety from waiting. After about 5 or 6 minutes, the thick brown wooden door opened again, and a young man in a black tweed coat and a half-top hat came in. The gentleman's appearance wasn't even 30 years of age. His face was thin and angular. He had both a mature and gloomy temperament. It was none other than Klein who had slightly modified his appearance and changed his persona. He wasn't wearing gold-rimmed glasses, but his eyesight was unaffected. With a casual sweep with his eyes, his gaze landed on Alger's dark blue sideburns. Klein looked down and saw the Hanged Man card placed face up on the deck. Without a word, he walked over, took off his hat, and sat down opposite Alger. He said with a grim smile, "I'd like to have a divination." As he spoke, he had already taken in the appearance of the most senior member of the Tarot Club. Deep facial features, rough outline, with a clear weathered look. It's obvious he was a person adept at fighting and is often outdoors. His skin is bronze in color, but it differs from that of the natives. He's like the result of a pure Loanese being battered by the elements for years, but the dark blue hair is more peculiar, something that doesn't belong to Lone. It's closer to the colonists of Desi Bay who live in Berserk Sea region. Mixed blood. Klein made his judgment. Alger looked at the gentleman across him, slowly superimposing his image with that of the world. Then he pushed out the tarot card and said in a low voice, "This requires you to shuffle and cut your own cards." Klein reached out and picked them up, spreading them fully to take them in. Following that, he gathered them together and did a reshuffle. He cut the cards continuously, took out 3 cards, and placed them in an arrangement of past, present, and future. Klein slowly leaned back, but he turned over the middle tarot card with his right hand. It showed a naked woman wearing only a purple silk scarf, surrounded by a green wreath like a door. This was the world. Number 21. Number 22 returned to 0, symbolizing the fool. How should I interpret this? Klein asked deliberately. Although the Hanged Man hadn't explicitly mentioned that the world was the adorer of the fool, Klein didn't think it was necessary to hope otherwise. He felt that being honest about it aided in establishing his image. If Alger hadn't guessed it, then it was an act of being open and confident. If Alger already knew about the matter, it would make the world appear at ease, as if everything was within his grasp. He knows I know? He already believes that I've guessed it before raising the topic above the grey fog? Impressive. Alger's heart skipped a beat as he replied at a moderate pace. It's inverted. It means that things will fail due to a lack of preparation. What kind of preparations are needed? Klein thoughtfully nodded and asked. Alger took back all the tarot cards apart from the world and skillfully reshuffled and cut the cards. Then, he flipped open the top card. It was the Hierophant. Alger's voice remained deep and low. You need advice. You need the help of faith and religion to avoid going down the wrong path. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he followed the sequence and turned over the second card. On it was the moon which overlooked the land. You will be confused, you will be exhausted, and you will be wandering in your dreams, but this is only temporary. Next, Alger handed over a third tarot card. It was the sun, everything shall pass, and the light will shine upon the land. He spoke like a charlatan. Klein remained silent for a few seconds, then seemingly asked for confirmation. Church, dream, sun. A hint of a smile spread across Alger's face. He nodded slightly and said, That's right. He had hidden hints for the follow-up plan during the tarot divination. In fact, in a situation where he had no skin in the matter and wasn't even noticed, there was no need to be so tactful. He could have described things in detail directly, but Alger felt that he still needed to test out an adorer like the world. He wanted to know if he was smart enough, rather than relying on his strength. If their intelligence were on the same level, Alger felt that they could cooperate more in the future. There was no need to talk too much between smart people. On the contrary, he would try to not involve the world in his own affairs. He would only ask for help when he needed a helper, unless Mr. Fool had other orders. Now, the world's response and previous performances had confirmed that he was sly, vicious, and experienced. I'm a tarot card expert. On such matters, Mr. Hanged Man, you're just a rookie. Klein secretly laughed, belittling him inwardly. The message hidden in the Hanged Man's interpretation was very simple. The Hierophant meant that he wanted to inform the Church of Storms about blazing Danitz and Steel Mavedi, and then use the power of the mandated punishers to divide the enemy and reap the benefits. This was something Klein often used, so there was no difficulty in understanding. The moon and the sun cards which followed were a reminder and warning from the Hanged Man. Since the mandated punishers were involved, a certain amount of caution had to be taken. According to Alger's experience, his colleagues in Biome would definitely use a sealed artifact that could force many people within its range to fall into a dream, when dealing with similar issues. Mavedi's characteristic meant that there had to be a specific item in the sun domain which targeted him. I'm immune to dreams, so I'm not afraid of the sun. Klein reached out his hand and half-turned the inverted the world card, turning it into its proper position, meaning that this plan was feasible and that he would make preparations. Alger raised his head and took a deep breath. The master here specializes in aromatherapy. She can use the fragrances of different essential oils, extract, incense, and flower essence to treat corresponding emotional problems and pacify the restless mind. Do you want to try it? Using the contact point at Amiris Avenue? Klein smiled in response. Okay. The two of them looked at each other as they remained motionless. They stopped talking about the aromatherapy anymore as both of them already had everything laid out. Klein didn't stay any longer than necessary. He took out his pocket watch, looked at it, and slowly stood up. Alger wiped away his smile, pressed his hand to his chest, and slightly bowed. Let us praise God. All divination outcomes come from his revelation. Oh, you even know how to express your loyalty. Klein tried to hold back his laughter as he replied seriously, imitating Alger, Let us praise God. He took 2 steps away, then suddenly stopped and looked back at Alger, chuckling as he put on his hat. Frankly, you aren't suitable for that type of attire. Alger couldn't keep up with Mr. World's train of thought. When Klein had left the themed coffee shop, Alger retracted his gaze and looked at the mirror in the corner and took a good look at himself. Initially, he didn't think there was anything wrong wearing that. However, after the World's remark, he found it more inconsistent the more he looked at himself. Finally, he understood why he had said that. A fellow who looked boorish and hardened, one appearing capable of summoning 100 sailors at any time to beat up his opponent or bringing out an axe and chopping them into pieces, really shouldn't be wearing such a mysterious classical warlock robe. It made his bearing somewhat abnormal. Cathedral of Waves. Alger, who had changed back into his original clothes, kept a low profile and followed the worshippers into the hall. He took advantage of the act of making a confession in order to meet the bishop, Chogo, through the priest in charge. After saluting, he went straight to the point. I met Blazing Danitz, who claims that the key that Vice Admiral Iceberg possesses has nothing to do with Death's treasure and that they are even willing to sell it. He entrusted me with a mission to take note of Steel Mavadi's whereabouts. Apparently, he was injured by the second mate of the Admiral of Blood, and is in a rush to escape from his pursuit. Your Excellency, I wish to leak this news, making Steel Mavadi and his subordinates successful in cornering Blazing Danitz. And I wish to use this opportunity to capture them all or execute them on the spot. This will be able to effectively keep the arrogance of the pirates in check. Chogo revealed a look of approbation. Very good. The way you do things is better than I expected. Alger replied with a look of humility. This all stems from the Lord's guidance, and also from your teachings. In the evening, I'll find a suitable target to leak this news to. If I come to pray again, it will indicate that Steel Mavadi temporarily isn't taking action. If I do not appear, it means that I might be restrained by him or his subordinates to prevent any news from leaking. This means that they have fallen for the trap. After giving details of the location and other matters, Alger returned to the confessional and left as usual. 7:15 p.m. Amiris Leaf Bar. Alger, wearing a pair of baggy pants and a head towel wrapped around his dark blue hair, stood by a boxing ring and held a glass of Lanti-proof in his hand. With a mocking expression on his face, he looked at the two contestants with bruises all over. Soon, he noticed his target had entered the room and was heading straight for the bar counter. After a while, he sat down next to the thin man and said with a chuckle, I heard that Steel has arrived in Byam. The man tilted his head in alarm and replied with a fake smile. Why don't I know about it? Is that so? It looks like Blazing fooled me. Alger smacked the bar counter and drank a mouthful of alcohol. Blazing Danitz? The man's eyes lit up as he asked hesitantly. Yes, that's him. Alger gritted his teeth. I met him this morning at the Gold Coin Casino. This damned fellow claimed that Steel was in Byam. Pooey! How dare he lie to me? The swarthy, thin man's eyes dotted around without interrupting. He finished listening quietly, stood up, and chuckled. I forgot that I have something to do. We should have a game of cards another time. He patted Alger on the shoulder and in a seemingly unhurried manner, left the bar in a hurry. Alger held a glass of alcohol, half turning to look at his back. His eyes appeared deep and gloomy, and there were no signs of a smile at the corners of his mouth. Chapter 525. The calm squall. Looking up at the wall clock and seeing that it was past 8 o'clock, Alger put down his glass mug of alcohol and pushed his way through the drunkards into the street. As the Rorstad archipelago was rich in coal, Byam was like the mainland cities of Backland and Pritz Harbor. Its streets were lined with tall black lamp posts, and the light of the burning gas effused through the metal grill, illuminating the relatively clean streets. Alger pulled off his headscarf and slowly turned into a side alley. At a dead end in the alley, he could smell the scent of urine mixed with alcohol. Although the Amiris Leaf Bar had a bathroom, it clearly wasn't enough for the customers during peak periods. Some of the drunks who couldn't hold it in could only find a secluded place to relieve themselves. The red moonlight penetrated the clouds and shone into the alley. While Alger was still considering whether he should put on a more convincing act, a firm and pervading voice came from behind him. Did you purposely leak the information about Blazing to us? He's not stupid. Alger muttered to himself as he slowly turned around, as though preparing for a surprise attack. 7 or 8 steps away, he saw a figure leaning against the wall. The figure was about 1.78 meters in height, and it wore a boat-shaped hat. Its face was thin and sharp, and it wore a look of aggression. He had a lock of black hair hanging down, half obscuring the dark green eyes on his left side, which softened his own coldness. Even though there was often quite a difference between a wanted poster and the person in question, many famous pirates didn't even don disguises as they wandered the city. As an insider of the church, Alger had seen many almost photographic portraits drawn with rituals and had participated in pirate conventions. He was still able to successfully link the person in front of him to a name on the bounty notices. He didn't express this point and deliberately hesitated before asking, Calm Squall. He was the chief helper of Steel Mavidi, a beyonder who was good at controlling his emotions and thinking calmly, but he was also inhumane and had a 1,500 pounds reward offered for him. The man pulled at his black windbreaker and revealed an empty smile. Can I deny that? Well, probably not. Just like how you can't deny that you deliberately mentioned Blazing to Amaru. He's not someone who enjoys using his brain, the complete opposite of me. I've never thought of lying. I only wish to obtain some payment for the news you received from me. Between Blazing, who's alone, and Steel, who has so many helpers, anyone with a brain would know which to choose. Of course, I wish that you keep it a secret. I don't want to be pursued by Vice Admiral Iceberg, Alger replied frankly. Squall nodded his head leisurely and said, Tell me the specifics. Just like I mentioned before. I bumped into and recognized Blazing at the Gold Coin Casino. He entrusted me to take note of Steel's whereabouts. Heh, it seems like he wishes to launch a counterattack, Alger said with a scoff. We agreed upon a point of contact. I believe this is intelligence worth at least 1,000 pounds. 1,000 pounds? Look up at the crimson moon. Are you dreaming? Squall scoffed. This might be a trap. Don't you understand that? Blazing might very well have found helpers, which is why he dares to seek us out. It's not for me to judge whether it's a trap or not. 500 pounds. Less than that, and I'd rather pretend that nothing has happened. Alger attempted to argue on the basis of reason for the reward. 300 pounds. You have to follow me somewhere and stay there for some time. It's to prevent you from selling this piece of news to others and spoiling our plans. We'll pay you when we capture Blazing with the intelligence you provided or have his spirit channeled. Don't worry. Food, alcohol, and a bed will all be free. Regardless, you lucked out. If there are any accidents that had resulted from you, hee. I believe you'll know the outcome, Squall suggested with a tone which didn't allow for refusal. Sure enough, just as I expected with my background being unknown, and with me not being too dangerous, the possibility of them choosing temporary detention is much higher than silencing me. However, I've also made preparations for a worst-case scenario. As long as I'm not too careless, escaping isn't a problem. Alger deliberately acted like he was in a dilemma as he said, No more than 2 days, or my crew will leave with my ship. I'll inform them if it exceeds 2 days. At some point in time, a sharp scalpel had appeared in Squall's palm, and he was making it jump and spin like an acrobat. After Alger described in detail the point of contact at 15 Amiris Avenue and the corresponding communication methods, Squall didn't speak further. He turned around and led Alger as they turned at every corner, and they arrived at an unknown street before entering a nondescript house. Long time no see, blue-haired captain of a ghost ship. The door was opened by an old man with hair that had more white than black. He was dressed as a local and wore a pair of baggy pantaloons. Old Quinn. You really are the intelligence officer of the Admiral of Blood, Alger deliberately said in astonishment. Old Quinn chuckled and said, There's always some truth to rumors. What you imagine to be fake might very well be real. He didn't switch on the gas wall light, but he carried a silver candle lamp in his hand as he guided Alger and Squall through the dark hall into a spacious windowless basement. You'll stay here for a while. My friends and I will be in charge of watching you and also provide you with alcohol and food, Old Quinn said with a laugh. To show our sincerity, we're not going to disarm you. All right. Alger took the initiative to walk to the low bed in the basement. Old Quinn closed the heavy stone door and locked it behind him. Squall didn't linger on, but hurried away, checking repeatedly to see if he was being followed. After changing to a rental carriage, he came to a lone enclave in Byam. It was also the residential area of the upper class. As he entered a garden bungalow, Squall saw Mavady sitting on a sofa in the living room, waiting for him. The others were either lying, standing, or sitting in a semicircle, with puppets and zombies acting as guards around them. Steel's lips were thick, his skin swarthy. His hair was curled up like steel balls often seen in factories. Is the intel reliable? The muscles on his arms trembled, exuding vibes of tremendous strength. However, his entire being emanated a cold and sinister feeling, as if he wasn't a living creature. Squall nodded. He's a pirate captain who serves money. I've already detained him at Old Quinn's place. If there really is a problem, he definitely won't be able to leave that place alive. I think he knows this very well. At this point, Squall revealed a cold smile. However, we still have to be wary of any accidents. This might be a trap set up by Blazing. Do you have any ideas? Mavady asked directly. The first thing he saw was a pirate lying on a couch. He was wearing a brown local tunic and twirling a yellowish-brown straw hat with his fingers. This was Mavadi's deputy of this round of operations.
He was the captain of the 6th ship which was lost in the battle with Vice Admiral Dusk, Blood Brambles Hendry.
He had a bounty of £3,800. It's clear that Squall has a plan. Hendry used his straw hat to cover his pale face.
Squall chuckled and said, "Didn't that adventurer John Smith send Mordor to join us under cover?
Let's deliberately leak the news to him, making him think that we're still waiting for help and that we can only take action the day after tomorrow or 3 days later. Those bunch of greedy adventurers definitely wouldn't let Blazing off. They'll definitely fall over themselves for him. When the time comes, we can find a spot to watch the show. If there are any accidents, they'll be the ones bearing the brunt of things. If everything is successful, we can also cull them."
"All right."
Steel Mavadi's eyeballs slightly moved, radiating intense bloodthirst. In the early hours of the morning, everything was ready. Blood Brambles Hendry brought a leather suitcase over, took out a peacock blue carpet, and slowly spread it out in front of him. There were many mysterious patterns on it that had a non-human flavor to it. Mavadi, Squall, and 2 other Beyonders, as well as 8 zombies and puppets, took their places on it. Hendry was the last to step in.
Closing his eyes halfway, he recited a single word in Elvish: "Flight."
The peacock blue carpet tightened suddenly and floated upwards, lifting everyone up from the ground and into the air as they flew towards Amiris Avenue. During this process, Hendry pulled out a black handkerchief and shook his wrist, turning it into the night sky which magically covered all their traces under the moonlight. In about 7 to 8 minutes, they arrived in the area around 20 Amiris Avenue. Diagonally across them was the targeted house. They didn't move forward.
Instead, they let the flying carpet hover silently in front of the crown of a thick tree as they lay prone to observe the situation.
Time passed, second by second, as Hendry studied the mystical item. There were no signs of a lack of spirituality. The night slowly passed, and the horizon was suffused with a faint red glow. The sun was about to rise, and the gang of pirates led by Steel Mavadi began their preparations to find another suitable spot for daytime surveillance. At this moment, a figure nimbly moved across the rooftops with his back bent, arriving above 15 Amiris Avenue. He wore a black cloak, his eyebrows yellow, and eyes dark blue. His facial features and contours were relatively soft. It was none other than Blazing Danitz. Danitz looked around cautiously for a moment, then climbed up the raised chimney, pushed his hand through it, and slid down. "He's really here?" Steel Mavadi, Blood Brambles Hendry, Squall, and company felt their spirits lift at the same time. At this moment, several figures sprang up from the chimneys and periphery of Units 13, 14, and 17. They rushed over with fast and potent stances, either breaking the windows, kicking open the doors, or using the chimney to rush into Unit 15 from different positions. Chapter 526. Dream of Eternity. The Rorstad Archipelago was the lone kingdom's governing branch in the central areas of the Sonia Sea. Similarly, it was a key diocese of the Church of Storms. It had a high-ranking deacon, who was part of the Council of Cardinals, permanently stationed here.
Of course, even a pirate at the level of admiral might not be able to stir such a powerful figure into action, much less when it dealt with a second mate and bosun. As a result, it was left to Deacon Cordoba Roy, who happily accepted the order and led 2 mandated Punisher teams to activate sealed artifacts 2-37 and 2-166. They lay in ambush at a distance from 15 Amiris Avenue in order to be absolutely safe. From Cordoba Roy's perspective, a team of mandated Punishers with 2 sealed artifacts was enough to deal with a group of pirates consisting of Steel and Blazing Danitz, but the latter's intention of keeping an eye of his pursuers' whereabouts caused him to worry. Instinctively, he felt that there was a problem, so he called for an additional team of mandated Punishers. Actually, just having 2-37 is sufficient. While they waited, Cordoba Roy suddenly sighed. In his opinion, this sealed artifact would be the nightmare of Steel, Blazing, and company. He closed his eyes and the corresponding information appeared in his mind. Number 37. Name: Dream of Eternity. Danger grade 2. Dangerous. It has to be used with care and moderation. It can only be applied for operations that require 3 or more people, a deacon or diocese bishop. Security classification: Bishop, Team Captain, and above. Sealing method: place in boiling water. Description: it has the appearance of a heart. It's black in color,
feels ice-cold to the touch, and is filled with holes, often making a sound like a flute. This item originates from a primitive tribe in West Balam of the southern continent. They have spirit warlocks as their leaders and are nocturnal. A lone army company conquered the tribe, received the object they revered on the altar, and in the week that followed, there were cases of soldiers acting abnormally, going mad, committing suicide, and so on. Research shows that as long as one comes into contact with this item, they will enter a long dream. If not woken up by someone else, one will forever remain in that illusory world. On the surface, they would appear frustrated, fearful, and confused. One's mental and biological states will gradually change. The researchers who were awakened were still unable to tell the difference between reality and dreams for a long time, which led to a series of tragic events, including, but not limited to, expressing love to their superiors, kissing the mouth of a venomous snake, suffering from depression, undressing and running naked, and attempting to bathe in boiling water. If they weren't transferred to another city, the only possible outcomes would be madness and suicide. This item can be used, causing all creatures within the target's surroundings to fall into the same dream. The user can choose the target to a certain extent and excluded companions. The effective radius is a maximum of 50 meters. Beyond that would burden the user tremendously, dealing severe mental damage. The user will enter a state of being unable to distinguish reality from dreams after the matter, and will have to leave the city where 2-37 is located for any chance of recovery. Many examples, see appendix, show that even without contact, this item can affect the surrounding population greatly unless it's placed in boiling water. Appendix 1. It is similar to the effects of a nightmare from the Evernight pathway, but it's more prominent and uncontrollable. 2. Example 1. A keeper once forgot to add charcoal, causing the fire to go out and the temperature of the boiling water to drop. He soon had an abnormal reaction, and he was suspected to be dreaming of a beloved girl of his. He began to make a passionate confession to his glove, and tried to engage in relation beyond that of friendship with it. Example 2. As his thoughts churned, Cordoba Roy suddenly saw Blazing Danitz, the Golden Dream's fourth bosun, come to this point of contact to collect information. He gestured with his hand, signaling the mandated punishers to open the golden box engraved with numerous symbols and magic labels before taking out sealed artifact 2-37, which was soaked in boiling water. The golden box contained another sealed artifact, 2-166. It could maintain the original temperatures of the objects inside, and to a certain extent, it could change the weather, producing sun-holy water rain. Of course, it also had very negative effects. Otherwise, the mandated punishers would have long used it to seal 2-37 instead of using it as a temporary trick. The most unacceptable negative effect was that no matter what object remained in prolonged contact with it, it would become infected with the characteristics of life, and it would also piously believe in the eternal blazing Sunday. Within the mandated punishers, a table had already appeared that sang praises of the eternal blazing sun every day, and there was a candle that wished to light itself every second to purify everything. In response, the irascible mandated punishers had turned the table into a pile of firewood, and they had lit it using the aforementioned candle. Seeing figures appear one by one and dashing towards 15 Amiris Avenue, Cordoba Roy didn't hesitate to press his right hand down, ordering the team member beside him to activate sealed artifact 2-37. An illusory fish scale immediately appeared on the surface of that member's palm, and he directly grabbed the sealed artifact that resembled a pitch-black heart, out of the boiling water. The melodious sound of a flute rang out, and dense darkness enveloped the house at 15 Amiris Avenue. The scene before adventurer John Smith remained the same. It was still the bare, unfurnished living room and the black-cloaked Blazing Danitz. He didn't appear like he was in a dream. They ran over with all their might, fired, and used their own abilities to successfully injure Blazing and capture the famous pirate who had a bounty of £3,000 and was involved with the key to death. However, in the real world, they were sitting with their legs up, or swimming with their arms outstretched, or using their fingers as guns, with their mouths making shooting sounds. Move out! Cordoba Roy left his hiding place and rushed to the house at 15 Amiris Avenue. The other mandated Punisher team members were divided into two groups and began encircling the house from different positions. Before Cordoba arrived, the living room was already brightly lit, as if the sun was rising. Holy pure water dripped down like rain. It none other than sealed artifact 2-166 being put to use. At a distance away, the flying carpet floated silently in the darkness. As soon as Steel Mavati and the others saw the mandated punishers appear,
They immediately understood that this was indeed a trap set by blazing Danitz. This son of a bitch, he actually defected to the Church of Storms.
Mavedi growled as mania flashed in his eyes.
Blood Brambles Hendry looked at Calm Squall and sincerely praised him. Fortunately, we weren't careless. In fact, I didn't expect a foolish donkey like Blazing Danitz to cooperate with the Church of Storms, Squall said calmly. Perhaps, the injured him was already captured by the mandated punishers, and he had no choice but to cooperate with them. Just as they were about to leave, they saw something protruding from the shadows outside the house at 15 Amiris Avenue.
Something was sticking to the ground and quickly moving away. Blazing! Steel Mavedi recalled the scenes of his failed ambush. Danitz! Hendry also recognized the man who had tried to escape with his magical powers. Squall was taken aback for a moment before coming to a realization.
Either Blazing Danitz wishes to use this opportunity to escape the mandated Punisher's control, or he has other traps to use against us. However, for some reason, the mandated Punishers were attracted, so he had no choice but to give up and flee.
Regardless, this is an opportunity. Blood Brambles Hendry glanced at the mandated Punishers who had stormed the house.
As long as we seize this minute, we'll be able to kill and take away Blazing under the noses of the mandated Punishers.
Steel Mavedi's hopes were momentarily raised as his eyes revealed an abnormal look of mania. After Squall nodded, he said to the other two Beyonders, "Take my zombies and puppets and guard this position. Once the mandated Punishers are here, use them to create chaos and take the opportunity to escape." "Yes, boss." The two Beyonder pirates jumped off the flying carpet at the same time with the zombies and puppets. The peacock blue carpet made a turn and shot ahead of Blazing. "Provide us support. Mainly be on guard against the surroundings."
"I'm worried that Danitz has other helpers." Squall seized the moment and said to the Blood Brambles Hendry.
A smile appeared on Hendry's pale face. "All right." Without saying anything else, Squall nodded at Steel Mavedi. Relying on his advantage from being high in the sky, Mavedi was able to distinguish the mostly normal shadows, determining the direction of the target. He suddenly jumped off the flying carpet and landed heavily on the ground like a giant boulder. White frost condensed under his feet as a layer of cold and transparent ice quickly spread to the side. The black shadow was immediately frozen in the corner. With a crack, Blazing Danitz struggled to break free, growing out of the shadows. On the flying carpet, Hendry showed their good teamwork by dropping what he had long held in his hand. They were green leaves, flowers, and brambles. The leaves, petals, and brambles wildly grew in size or joined together, ensnaring Blazing Danitz, making him immobile. Squall took the opportunity to jump off the flying carpet and thrust a sharp scalpel in his right palm towards Danitz's neck. Splat! He held onto the handle of the scalpel with his right hand and circled around to the back of the target. Danitz's head fell off and his body quickly shrank, turning into a thin, tattered paper figurine. At the same time, Steel Mavedi felt an indescribable sense of hunger bearing down on him. It was like a terrifying monster hidden in the darkness, quietly watching him. No, it's not Blazing. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, an extremely compressed, incandescent fireball flew over from one of the rooftops, smashing towards his body. Steel Mavedi only made one movement, and that was to raise his arm in front of his body. Boom! The flames exploded and a shockwave radiated in all directions, blocking Squall's and Hendry's line of sight. However, they weren't flustered at all, as they had the utmost confidence in Steel. Sure enough, Mavedi only suffered from having his clothes torn and his skin covered in white marks. Apart from that, he hadn't suffered any injuries at all. But at that moment, he suddenly saw a figure walking out of the roiling flames in the sky. It was clearly a black cloak belonging to Blazing Danitz, but it had neatly combed black hair, dark, emotionless eyes, and a thin, cold face. The Danitz from before had always been Faceless Klein, Gehrman's Sparrow, who had always been prepared for the hunt. Chapter 527. A quick battle. Just as he leaped out of the flames, the 2 points of light in the eyes of Klein, who wore golden gloves on his left hand, enlarged in size and changed from dark to bright, as if they were lightning that suddenly cut across the sky. After distracting Steel Mavedi and company's attention with paper figurine substitutes, he had activated Creeping Hunger and switched to the Interrogator's soul. He planned on using the Psychic Piercing Beyonder power. Ah! Steel Mavedi suddenly cried out miserably. It was as if someone had stabbed a knife into his head, stirring his grayish-white brain. A feeling of pain came from the depths of his soul, instantly occupying his mind.
At the same time, his Beyonder powers erupted from the irritation and turned into a hurricane that spread out in all directions.
Suddenly, beautiful snowflakes began to fall from the sky.
Layers of translucent ice began spreading outwards, and the trees on both sides of the road were covered with white edges.
They withered quickly, revealing traces of decay.
The lingering resentment of the remnant spirits was successively awakened. They sobbed, wailed, and shrieked, causing the nearby area to be dyed with a gray and repressed color.
Klein naturally descended from the sky, his left glove shining like the sun. He opened his arms and leaned back as if embracing something. Just as his heels touched the cold ground, a pure, blazing, thick pillar of light descended from above. This holy radiance enveloped Steel Mavati, illuminating his dark skin, firm muscles, and steel ball-like curly hair. Priest of light, light of holiness.
Without a sound, Mavati's expression became even more twisted, and his skin began to show signs of melting.
At this moment, he was like a candle that had been thrown into a burning fireplace. Compared to the corrupted Bishop Millet, as a zombie, he was weaker towards such attacks. The damage he took was even more serious. The snowflakes stopped falling, and the ice on the ground quickly melted. The trees that had white edges revealed their brown colors.
There was no doubt that the powerful beam of light had caught the attention of Blood Brambles Hendry and Squall.
The former's expression changed as he reached into his secret pocket and pulled out materials casting magic. He planned to use his terrain advantage to save Steel Mavati. At this moment, a raven made purely out of flames suddenly appeared before his eyes. 1, 2, 3. Countless fire ravens filled Hendry's field of vision like crimson stars. They flew over from all directions, flapping their wings in a dense, scorching hot formation. Hendry's heart skipped a beat as his gaze seemed to freeze. He immediately moved his hand elsewhere to grab another type of material. Whoosh! He scattered light blue powder on his body while he chanted in ancient Hermes, "Sea waves." The powder suddenly expanded and turned into dark blue waves that spread out in all directions. When they met the fire ravens, they made sizzling sounds and created a large amount of white fog. The fire wave from the previous explosion had subsided a little.
Through the remnants of the crimson light, Squall saw that Steel Mavati's skin was melting like wax and his flesh melted inch by inch. He saw the unfamiliar man in a black cloak standing next to him.
He didn't panic.
Like a cold-blooded viper who had lost its emotions, he calmly raised his arms and abruptly pressed both his palms down.
In a split second, he saw the thin, grim-faced young man's body sink. His movements had turned slow, as though the wings he used for flying had been snapped. As for Steel Mavati, he began to struggle and roll in order to avoid a second round of light of holiness. Immediately following that, Squall noticed that the man had lost his weight and thickness.
Once again, he turned into a thin paper figurine, pressed to the ground by an invisible force before soaking into the mud that came as a result of the melting ice.
Klein phased into existence from another position. He rubbed his right thumb and middle finger together and snapped his fingers 3 times as he rushed forward. Pa, pa, pa. The sunbird-shaped dark golden brooch in front of him flashed continuously as it added a purifying element to his air bullets. Bang, bang, bang. The 3 bullets connected at an extremely fast speed and hit the slow-moving Steel Mavati in his right chest, penetrating his half-melted skin and flesh, creating an exaggerated gruesome wound. Golden flames spread in all directions. So. Squall tossed out scalpels after scalpels, but they were all dodged by Klein's deft, acrobatic maneuvers. At that moment, Steel Mavati had gotten a breather.
With a push of his palm, he stood up once again and charged straight at the enemy, fully displaying his advantage in close combat, as well as his abnormally strong body that could withstand powerful blows.
Ice formed under his feet again, and his fists effused a rotting aura. Then once again, he saw 2 bolts of lightning shoot out from Klein's dark brown eyes, shooting into his own. Steel Mavati subconsciously raised his head and clenched his teeth. His nose, mouth and ears were all leaking blood, adding to his previously melted skin. While shooting the air bullets, Klein had changed the soul he used for grazing. It was still interrogator, and it was still psychic piercing. Against a Beyonder like a zombie which had a body as tough as steel, dealing damage to the spirit body was far more effective. While the repeated strikes made Steel Mavati's body stiffen for short periods of time, he lost the shackles of his reasoning. Black, firm hair grew from his face, 1 strand at a time, while his teeth and nails also constantly grew longer. His skin squirmed in a bid to coalesce, turning from black to white. He was like a real crazy zombie who was thirsting for blood. Klein took this opportunity to close in.
He bent his body and brushed past Steel Mavati's shoulder. He then stuffed the item in his hand into the hideous wound that he had created into the man's body. It was a bottle with a few ordinary brass bullets, and inside it was a large amount of sun holy water that Klein had prepared in advance.
Oof! Klein, who didn't stop, caused Squall's attempt to control him to fail again. With a twist of his heel, he moved behind Steel Mavati, his back to him. Pow! He raised his right hand and snapped his fingers before Steel Mavati could pull out the glass bottle. Bang! A light explosion rang out, and fiery crimson light soared, shattering the already fragile glass bottle. Large amounts of sun holy water inundated Steel Mavati's body. The infamous pirate with a bounty of 6,000 pounds froze where he stood, his throat letting out an anguished groan. He plopped to his knees. A dark green gas in his body was pouring out and disappearing into the air. At the sight of this, Squall's eyes darkened. He immediately took out an iron-black charm and muttered a word in ancient Hermes. Shriek! The charm suddenly cracked and vanished, completing the sacrifice. An invisible sound wave swept outwards like a tsunami, almost successively drilling into the ears of everyone around. Klein's mind buzzed, the tip of his nose cold. Blood oozed out, and Blood Bramble's Hendry on the flying carpet was in an even more miserable state. His face was twisted, and his body convulsed as he fell down, unable to even let out a tragic scream. On the contrary, Blazing Danitz, who was far away on a rooftop, wasn't subject to any effects. He happily threw out another blob of a highly compressed incandescent fireball. The fireball landed on Hendry's body without any resistance and exploded with a loud boom. Flesh and blood splattered outwards. Flames wrapped around his fingers, calves, and head before he fell to the ground. The flying carpet then lost control and slowly settled down. Squall took the opportunity to turn around and run, not hesitating in the slightest. However, he was stunned to discover that the terrifying man, who had almost finished off Steel Mavati within 10 seconds, didn't seem to show the slightest signs of being impeded. He had turned around and given chase. How is that possible? This a shriek charm created by Admiral.
Squall had no time to think over the reasons.
He ran as fast as he could down the other street. At that moment, his head was suddenly hit hard by someone. A tearing pain made his whole body spasm. The lightning in Klein's eyes faded as he raised his right hand and snapped his fingers once more. Bang! An air bullet crossed the distance of about 10 meters and accurately drilled into the back of Squall's head. Squall didn't have the non-human endurance that Steel had. His vision immediately blackened, and he slowly fell to the ground. Klein caught up with him in a few steps, reached out his left hand, and let the jubilant creeping hunger enjoy the meal. I have heard the voice of the true creator before, and I've experienced Mr. Door's call for help. I have great resistance in this aspect, and I can even quickly recover from the shrieking of a wraith, let alone a mere charm. Klein muttered silently to himself as he watched Squall's body be reduced to flesh and blood and plunge into the open mouth of creeping hunger. After a few seconds, creeping hunger came to a satisfied halt, and Klein quickly returned to Steel Mavati's side. This zombie had been miserably purged. Although his head remained intact, he was already dead. Klein took a few steps forward, picked up the peacock blue flying carpet that had fallen to the ground, wrapped it around Steel's body, and lifted it. Glancing back at 15 Amiris Avenue, he listened to the commotion of rampaging zombies and puppets, and he sensed that the mandated punishers were approaching. Klein pulled his hood over his head, bowed slightly in that direction as a salute. Pa! Klein rubbed his fingers, and all of the paper fragments around him were set ablaze, producing crimson-red columns of fire. Under the light of the fire, his body turned illusory, and he vanished from where he stood, with the items turning into a shadow. As for the beyonder characteristics of Squall and Hendry, which were slowly coming into existence, he didn't take a look, nor did he pay any attention to them. Greed would cause him to fall into unnecessary danger. Besides, the harvest he had reaped now was already sufficient. After leaving some of the mandated punishers to deal with the rampaging zombies and puppets, the pirates who had been damaged by his companions, and the beyonder adventurers who were caught, Cordoba Roy led the rest of the team and rushed over. However, all they saw were scattered corpses, scalpels, and withered trees on the streets. They could distinguish the receding aura of the sun,
as well as the evil sensation that came from the depths of flesh and blood.
Chapter 528. Grazing. It was early in the morning, and the sky had just brightened up slightly. Most of the alleys were dark and quiet. With the aid of Danet's cloak, Klein blended into the shadows and quickly moved about. He felt as if his surroundings were grayish-black and transparent, with reality being blurred. All sounds seemed to come from the depths of the starry sky, empty and distant. After staying as far away from Amiris Avenue as possible, he acquired his bearings and grew out from the shadows. He appeared in an empty alley filled with broken stones. Klein's hands shook, throwing Steel Mavadi's peacock blue flying carpet out in front of him. He wanted to finish the grazing before Mavadi's spirit body began dissipating. Throwing away the flying carpet, he took a step forward, stretched out his left hand, and extended his 5 fingers, aiming from above at the corpse that was still warm. Creeping hunger revealed its original appearance, a thin material that looked like it was made up of human skin. 2 eyes had split open in the middle of its palm. Its pupils were bright red, as though they were dyed in blood. Whoosh! A bone-chilling breeze suddenly blew through the alley. It swirled around Steel Mavadi's corpse, twisting into an almost transparent human figure. One could vaguely see thick lips and curled hair that resembled steel beads. Mavadi's spirit body wore an abnormally pained expression as he tried his best to resist the suction of the creeping hunger.
As for the grayish-white and blackish-green dots of light, they were like a surging galaxy, quickly flying out from his body and merging into the transparent figure.
No! Mavadi let out a soundless scream, already being too late to beg for mercy. All he could do was desperately slip into the human-skinned glove, becoming attached to an empty finger, and revealing his beyonder characteristic that connected with the environment to a certain extent. This connection determined what powers would be usable when grazing Steel Mavadi's soul. Perhaps it would be 1, 2, but no more than 3 powers. Klein had no choice over the number and details before they became fixed, as it was purely random. Creeping hunger quickly blanketed its paleness and finally returned to its former disguised state, a plain black glove.
Klein closed his eyes and sensed the changes for a few seconds before letting out a profound sigh.
This time, his luck wasn't bad, but it wasn't too good either. He had succeeded in acquiring 3 beyonder powers belonging to Steel Mavadi, but he didn't receive the body as hard as steel. The tenacious vitality of being impervious to gunfire, flames, or a certain degree of explosives. The first is the power of a zombie, which allows me to unleash a critical attack, making up for my previous flaws of only having a nimble combat style. The second is mastery over ice.
Although it's impossible to condense an ice spear or create a blizzard like that of the Demoness pathway to inflict a direct attack, I can freeze the surrounding ground, lower the temperature of the air, and effectively affect the movement of my enemy. If there's any physical contact, then I can even freeze the enemy's body or stiffen his flesh and blood. It's a perfect match for my combat ability. The third is the manipulation of zombies. Haha, I no longer need to be afraid of not being able to have partners for a round of cards. Klein thought for a moment, then he bent down to inspect the items on Steel Mavadi's person. He quickly found 26 pounds, 11 soldi, and 8 pence in cash, as well as a collection of strange things that seemed normal, such as candles, clips, a thorny whip and so on. Considering the fact that Steel Mavati was a member of the Rose School of Thought and belonged to the type of people who indulged in their desires, Klein vaguely understood what was going on.
Spitting on the ground, he only took the cash. Werewolf has supernatural healing powers. Zombie has a body like steel. There's really no need for him to carry any healing-related medicine or items. It's as Danitz concluded, Mavati doesn't have any mystical items. That's right, mystical items are few in number to begin with. Many have clear flaws and negative effects. Not everyone can have one even if they want one. Previously, in the group consisting of a wraith, zombie, and werewolf, there were only 2 mystical items: Scarlet Lunar Corona and Biological Poison Bottle. Klein nodded and took out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded the yellowed piece of paper and placed it on the body of Steel Mavati, covering his face. It was a bounty notice with a portrait of Mavati and the corresponding bounty reward, 6,000 pounds. Klein straightened up, took a step back, stepped on the peacock blue carpet, and pulled out a paper figurine. Pa! With a swing of his arm, his wrist shook, and the paper figurine was thrown out. It burst into flames before scattering into ashes. Soon after, he phased into a shadow and disappeared into the alley along with the items. 2 or 3 minutes later, Cordoba Roy rushed over with a portion of the mandated Punisher team, just in time to see a cool breeze blow up the bounty notice, revealing Steel Mavati's dissolving flesh and blood dissolving, his eyes wide open. Whoosh! The bounty notice fell to the side and remained facing up. Having lost track of their target, Cordoba and the others silently brought Steel's corpse back to the area where the battle had taken place. Glancing at the team members who were inspecting the site, the Deacon Cordoba restrained his emotions and asked in a deep voice, "A believer of the sun?" This was the most important question for him and his diocese. This involved a powerhouse whose combat prowess was equivalent to at least a sequence 5. He could only restrain his irascible mood and make the most rational decision. Inside Old Quinn's house, in the basement with the heavy stone door sealed shut, Alger was sitting on the low bed, quietly looking at the candles on the table when his vision blurred. He saw the gray fog emanate, along with the fool sitting on a high chair, overlooking everything. A blurry silhouette appeared below, hands clasped before his face as he said in a pious tone, "Honorable Mr. Fool, the matter has come to a successful conclusion." The matter has come to a successful conclusion? This involves Steel Mavati and several other Beyonders. The world sure is efficient at handling matters. His strength is stronger than I expected. As expected of an adorer of Mr. Fool. Heh, he might be able to sell another Beyonder characteristic at the Tarot Club, maybe even more than one. How did he get around the effects of sealed artifact 2-37? The uniqueness of a god's adorer? A thought flashed through Alger's mind, and he instinctively thanked Mr. Fool. Then, he took out a small metal bottle and smeared mint extract on the tip of his nose. A strong, irritating odor seeped into his head, instantly making Alger become abnormally clear-headed. At some point in time, a white gauze mask appeared in his hands, and he had poured the full moon essence oil onto it. After methodically putting on his mask, Alger stood up and walked slowly to the heavy stone door. With a staid series of movements, he retrieved a sealed metal jar from the inside of his clothes, twisted the mechanical switch, and pulled out a tube. Then, he stuffed the tube into the crevice of the stone door and extended it out. Without a sound, the gas inside the metal container started to emanate. This was the sanguine anesthetic gas provided by the moon, Emlyn. It can knock out strong commoners, sequence 9 Beyonders with strong bodies, and even higher sequences who were lacking in their constitution. Even if Old Quinn can resist the gas, he would still be significantly affected. As for his helpers and friends, Alger leaned against the stone door and waited patiently. When nearly a third of the gas was dispersed from the jar, he pulled the tube back and closed the switch. He turned around and listened attentively before receiving a satisfactory answer. Alger revealed a faint smile. He rapidly converged his aura and compressed it inside him. Suddenly, the muscles on his body bulged, and he threw a punch forward. Raging blow. Bang! The iron lock of the heavy stone door directly shattered, and the door itself opened up. Alger withdrew his fist and walked out, leaving only the sleeping figures outside. Author's note: Creeping hunger has 2 modes, grazing and devouring. The former targets the soul and Beyonder characteristic, while the latter targets the flesh and blood. Chapter 529. Tacitus 48 Acid Lemon Street, outside the Wind of Azure Inn. Dressed in a thick jacket and pantaloons, Blazing Danitz returned by taking a detour. He clung to the corner of a wall, remaining motionless for a long time. He was hesitating on whether to take the opportunity to run away and not face the terrifying madman, Gehrman Sparrow, again. Unlike the battle at Bansi Harbor, he was hiding on a rooftop far away this time. It allowed him to take in the entire battle zone. Therefore, while supporting Gehrman Sparrow and battling Blood Brambles Hendry, he finally saw the combat process of the crazy adventurer, finally grasping his Beyonder powers and traits. Paper figurine substitutes, phasing out from flames, psychic blasts, a holy beam from the sun domain, shooting out air bullets with his finger, the ability to disguise himself into another person, as well as a glove that changes its appearance several times and devoured Squall. His powers far exceed my imagination, and there are a few that can't be compatible with each other. This isn't something that can be explained simply with the addition of 1 or 2 miraculous items to a sequence. Also, the sense of hunger that came from the depths of his soul explains something. That glove from the Vice Admiral Hurricane, Creeping Hunger. Captain had specifically reminded us that the glove can use the souls of many Beyonders for grazing and thus use their powers. Danitz went through the thoughts he previously had and came to a final judgment. Gehrman Sparrow is the current owner of Creeping Hunger. He didn't feel any sense of belittlement simply because Gehrman had relied on a powerful mystical item to display such terrifying strength. Instead, he felt even more reverence for him. The reason for this was just one. A large part of using a mystical item to its fullest had to do with one's abilities. Without sufficient strength and extraordinary combat experience, even with Creeping Hunger, Gehrman Sparrow wouldn't have been able to finish off Steel Mavati and Calm Squall within 10 seconds. 2. His captain, Vice Admiral Edwina Edwards, learned from secret sources that Vice Admiral Hurricane didn't die at the hands of the Church of Storms, but instead, he was quickly killed by a particular powerhouse while fleeing. Danitz had no lack of understanding regarding the power of Vice Admiral Hurricane, Kalangos, back when he was at his peak. He knew that the standing of a powerhouse which could easily finish him off was equal to that of the top pirate powers. Furthermore, it would be two of the most powerful and terrifying ones, the King of the Five Seas and Queen Mystic. Although there's the factor of surprise, it would just lower the evaluation by a little. The person wouldn't be much weaker than the King of Immortality, and they'll be stronger than Admiral Hell and Admiral of Blood. Creeping Hunger now belongs to Gehrman Sparrow. This means that he's either the one who killed Kalangos, or there's a power figure at the level of the Four Kings backing him up. No matter which possibility it is, it's all the more terrifying than I had originally expected. Danitz's body tensed up. He really didn't want to face the adventurer who had crazy blood flowing in him. Phew! He heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that he had been hesitating here for too long, and that he had to make a decision as soon as possible. Gehrman Sparrow knows how to divine, and he's rather confident in his abilities in this domain. With my shadow cloak in his hands, escaping won't only fail, but it would also end up infuriating him. Shadow cloak is a rare mystical item. Clenching his teeth, Danitz turned the corner and went through the door of the hotel, all the way to the luxurious suite. After a few seconds of careful waiting and observation, Danitz took out his key and opened the door. He saw that the room was dark, that the gas wall lights hadn't been lit, and that the not very bright light of the early morning was shining through the window and onto Gehrman Sparrow, who was facing the door. The adventurer had changed back into his usual tweed black overcoat with dark trousers. He held a half-top hat in his hand, and his right foot was raised over his left thigh. He leaned back a little, his face obscured since his back was to the window. Only his dark brown eyes, which were exceptionally clear, watched the door with indifference and calmness. Danitz unconsciously lowered his head, laughed dryly and said, "In accordance with your instructions, I circled to a few news agencies and wrote the information that Blazing had killed Steel Mavati, Blood Brambles Hendry, and Squall on pieces of paper and threw them in. Of course, I mentioned having a powerful helper in this piece of news. He's a mysterious, unknown, a top adventurer, and a veteran bounty hunter." Klein nodded, revealing a polite smile. "Very good." With a sigh of relief, Danitz looked around and saw the peacock blue carpet. He was stunned for a few seconds before asking in puzzlement, "What about the heads of Steele and Hendry?" Klein replied calmly, "Wasn't taken." "You didn't take them?" Danitz exclaimed in astonishment. "Then what about our bounty?" As long as they had the heads of Steele and Blood Brambles, he would be able to get the appropriate bounty through people with connections. Although this would cost them 15 to 30% of the money received, he couldn't claim the bounty himself as a pirate. This was the only way, as the military's and the church's use of bounty rewards to encourage pirates to kill each other didn't mean that they would turn a blind eye to a gift that came walking through the door. To Danitz's surprise, Gehrman Sparrow, whose eyes were crazed with the desire for money, had actually not taken the heads of Steel and Blood Brambles, which meant that he had automatically given up on the bounty. Klein didn't answer him and pointed to the flying carpet on the ground. "You had helped in this. You have two choices. One is 3,000 pounds in cash, and the other is this flying carpet. You have 5 seconds to consider. Exceeding that time will be considered as forfeiting. 3,000 pounds in cash or the flying carpet. This flying carpet seems to only have the ability of suspension and flight. Furthermore, its speed isn't too fast, and it's not too useful. No, at sea, to a beyonder not from the sailor pathway, such items are very precious. At the very least, there's no need to worry about the aftermath of a ship being sunk." Danitz was momentarily thrown into a dilemma. Then he heard Gehrman Sparrow's voice counting. 3, 2. Danitz's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly said, "Flying carpet."
Klein nodded and said, "Okay." With the knowledge that Gehrman had great credibility, Danitz finally relaxed before asking with a grumbling mumble, "Why didn't you count 5 and 4?
Wasn't it supposed to be 5 seconds?
Klein replied without changing his expression, "Counted inwardly."
Counted inwardly. Danitz took a deep breath and grimaced.
Klein slowly stood up, flicked his wrist, threw the hat from his hand, and left it hanging firmly on the rack before walking to his bedroom.
Cathedral of Waves. Alger, who entered in the name of coming for morning prayers, met the diocese bishop, Chogo, and explained everything that had happened last night.
The only thing that had been modified was that the sanguine anesthesia gas had been turned into a slumber charm of the Church of Evernight.
Chogo nodded in approval. To be able to go deep into the enemy's lair and bear the risk of death for the sake of your faith, such an act is worthy of praise. You are a true storm attendant. Last night, we captured 5 Beyonders and killed 2 of them on the spot. As a result of this, Mavedi, Hendry, and Squall have also died. The heads of these 3 pirates will no longer appear, or they will be in our hands, so the government's bounty will be ours. The total receivable reward will exceed more than £10,000 in total, and you will receive the bulk of it, which is £6,000. Do not refuse. The Lord has told us that those who fight for their faith must not be reserved.
Holy Lord of Storms.
An excited Alger pounded his left chest with his fist. Although he and the world didn't agree on how to split the spoils of war, he believed that the 2 of them had come to a tacit understanding. For example, they were not to interfere with each other when hunting pirates. As the bounty needed to be laundered through the church, the 2 of them would split it equally. As for the bounty offered by countries and organizations such as Intis and Fay-Sac, Alger didn't hold any expectations for them. This was because every time one exchanged for the bounty reward, one needed to hand over the corpse or head of the target. Therefore, only one entity could be chosen. Only those with a deep background and good relations with the various organizations and countries could receive all of them. £3,000 will belong to the world. If I were to lose £3,000 at once, it will raise suspicion. Yes, I'll have to find an opportunity to buy a mystical item. Such things are rare, so they're often overpriced, even more so when in times of great need. No one will doubt that I spent £5,000 on a purchase that's worth £3,000.
If I sell the items obtained from Old Quinn, the ones he had received, the accounts would be squared.
Alger quickly came up with a follow-up solution.
Knowing that he had £3,000 waiting for him, Klein sat happily in the high-back chair of the fool and considered a serious question.
That is, after grazing Steel Mavedi, he had to release a soul from creeping hunger as he promised. Their Beyonder powers are quite useful. It's quite a pity to release them before finding a replacement.
Yes.
Besides, I've already released that Faceless. There doesn't seem to be a need to do it this time. Feelings of hesitation and reluctance to part had stirred in Klein's heart as he was thrown into a dilemma. He was unable to make a decision. After a long time, he leaned back and exhaled. I can't deceive myself. He shook his head and laughed, turning relaxed from making up his mind. He decided to keep his promise and release a soul. The Faceless from before had been released early because he wanted to receive some corresponding information. It was already an equal exchange. Which one should I release? Miss Justice bought the materials for a psychiatrist potion and a mystical item worth 5,500. Even if she's rich, her financial situation should be tight, so it wouldn't be appropriate to sell the psychiatrist characteristic at this time. Yes, she still owes my adorer £2,000 and will repay the money in February or March. Klein rejected the idea and decided to release the Nightmare. As a former Nighthawk, he always had an inclination and felt gratitude based on his impression and feelings towards Beyonders in this domain. Therefore, it wasn't difficult to make a choice in these situations without having any other factors to consider. Calming himself down, Klein picked up the human-skinned glove that he had previously brought above the grey fog. He closed his eyes and began to sense the distorted souls. Without any hesitation, he released the Nightmare. Chapter 530. Chronicles. The Nightmare appeared by the side of the long bronze table. He was a man in his 30s with black hair and blue eyes, a long, thin face, and obvious nasolabial folds. He had a beard that wasn't too thick by his mouth and chin. As the pain and the distortion eased, he pressed his hand to his chest and gave a solemn bow. Compared to the Faceless from before, The nightmare was obviously not as muddle-headed and weak after being released. It was unknown if the Evernight pathway's enhancement to one's soul was stronger than that of the Seer pathway, or if it was because the grazing process had only happened recently. Klein sighed silently and began asking via spirit channeling, "Why did you die at the hands of Kalangos?" The corner of the nightmare's mouth slightly curled up, revealing a bitter smile. "I'm a red glove from the Nighthawks. I was tracking down a bunch of ancient chronicles that originated from a Balam imperial tomb. We suspected that they were related to the reason for Death's passing. I found out that a part of it might have fallen into the hands of a particular tycoon, so I led 2 companions of mine and boarded the ship he was on. Unfortunately, we were attacked by Kalangos' fleet just as we were about to launch an investigation." "What happened to your companions?" Klein subconsciously asked. The nightmare said in a slightly pained tone, "We originally had the opportunity to leave and even kill Kalangos through our skillful teamwork, but our ship sank, and we had to board a lifeboat instead. Everyone died. No, they were killed in the line of duty." "May the goddess bless you." Klein drew a crimson moon inwardly. This made him more aware of the great difference between fighting at sea and fighting on land. Environmental factors were of critical importance. Beyonders not from the sailor pathway would be at a great disadvantage. If it wasn't because of the fact that the flying carpet had been huge, cumbersome, and slow, making him an easy target, Klein would have opted to keep it and give Dan its cash. "Fortunately, I have the bladder of a murloc. I can find an artisan to create a mystical item that allows me to swim underwater. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to find an artisan. Most of them are from the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, and there aren't many unaffiliated ones. Otherwise, mystical items wouldn't be this rare. If push comes to shove, I'll get Mr. Hanged Man to help." Klein looked at the nightmare who had been killed in the line of duty and said softly as he leaned back, "What's your name? What unfulfilled wishes do you have?" The figure of the nightmare was already slowly dissipating. When he heard Klein's question, he said with a smile, "My name is Davy Raymond. I lost my parents, wife, and siblings in a black magic incident, leaving me with only one daughter, Nilu. She was born in 1330 and is a very lovely girl. And I'm sorry to say that in order to investigate the truth over the black magic incident, I joined the Nighthawks and later became a red glove. I didn't manage to spend time with her, making her lose her father alongside her mother. Heh. I believe that the church will definitely give her my pension and secretly provide her a certain amount of help. I'm not worried about her life, but I only hope to see her enter the hall of marriage under the witness of the goddess, to have her own family and not be lonely anymore. It's already the year 1350. She may already have a marriage partner." Klein sighed wistfully and said, "Time flies." Davy Raymond muttered in response, "Tell her that all the culprits have been punished and that I died because of an accident. There's no need to hate anyone anymore. Tell her that Daddy loves her and Daddy is very sorry." His figure became more and more transparent, and he was about to disappear. Klein closed his eyes and asked, "Where does she live? What's the name of the tycoon who collected Death's chronicles?" "We live in Desi County's Conant City. It's a beautiful seaside city, with rich rubber plantations growing nearby. If she hasn't moved, then she'll be living at 67 Red Indus Street. The tycoon's name is Jimmy Necker." "He should have fallen into the hands of Kalangos as well." Before Davy Raymond finished speaking, his figure had already completely disappeared, leaving only a deep black gem-like object on the surface of his glove. Klein quietly watched this scene, and after a few seconds, he raised his right hand and tapped 4 times clockwise on his chest. He then said in a deep voice, "If there's a chance, I will visit your daughter and see how she's doing." In the palace, which looked like a giant's residence, the fog was endless, without any undulations, and was eternally unchanging. Klein put away Davy Raymond's Beyonder characteristic, rubbed his forehead, and turned his attention back to Death's chronicles. The Death pathway and the Evernight pathway can be switched at high sequences. There's nothing odd about the church sending personnel to investigate the corresponding chronicles. I wonder if Jimmy Necker is dead or not. I'll need to find out. If he has already perished in a tragic case, and the thing has fallen in Kalangos' hands, that will require me to investigate from the pirate side. Kalangos' crew now belongs to Vice Admiral Ailment, Tracy. As it involves Death, it might be able to help Mr. Azek. Klein decided to check it out in passing himself, and if he encountered any difficulties, he could write directly to the powerhouse. After clearing his mind, he quickly returned to the real world and used the ritual to summon creeping hunger back. After everything was done and seeing that it was already getting late, he gave up on the idea of trying to catch up on his sleep. He decided to summarize the experiences and lessons from last night's operation. The biggest lesson for Klein was that he had overestimated the patience of the mandated punishers. He had originally hoped that, even if there had been an accident in the beginning, the mandated punishers would have been able to restrain him and wait for the real target, the real protagonist, Steel Mavati, to appear. When that happened, they would have definitely used the sealed artifact which can pull many people into a dream, restraining all the unaffiliated Beyonders who had involved themselves in the Blitz. As for me, due to my uniqueness, I would be able to detect that I'm asleep and be able to forcibly escape. Then, I could have dealt with Steel Mavati and his helpers in a composed manner, completing an achievement of an instant kill, and also bring 2 corpses along with me. Yet, just as the incident happened, that bunch of irascible bros stormed in. They didn't even leave any backup teams to watch out for any contingencies. At the very most, they would let the wielder of the sealed artifact stay beyond the periphery, with 1 or 2 guards. The more Klein thought, the more he was at a loss on whether to laugh or cry. If it wasn't because Steel mandated Punisher's group of pirates who were more cautious and had at least 2 Beyonders assigned, as well as all their puppets and zombies to stop the mandated Punishers that might have pursued them, Klein would likely have found himself in a situation of going 2 against 5. If that had happened, he would have chosen to give up and directly engage in a strategic shift. What made Klein most satisfied was that he had done a pretty good job of making specific preparations. This was the professional habit of a magician. Because he had long known from Miss Sharon and Merrick about the traits of the first 5 sequences of the mutant pathway, Klein was well aware that Steel Mavati, who had gone through the lunatic phase, could use irrational factors to resist any Beyonder disruption and influence on his mind. He had very strong resistance in this aspect. Therefore, he gave up the thought of using Psychiatrist's Dragon Maiden Frenzy, as well as Nightmare, which was clearly weaker than the mandated Punisher's sealed artifact, and he instead focused on the Interrogator's Psychic Piercing and the Priest of Light's Purification powers. Psychic Piercing wasn't a Beyonder power that disrupted one's thoughts and affected one's soul, but a means to directly attack the spirit body. In essence, the other effect acted on one's body of heart and mind, and targeted the soul body. There was a clear difference between the two. If any part of that combo failed to chain in any way, Steel Mavati would have been able to recover, making it impossible for me to kill him quickly. And in that environment, that would spell failure. Yes. I've also used the Pathways trait of losing themselves to their desires, making it easy to grasp their emotions. I believe that once they suffered a psychic attack, there would be a high chance of them counterattacking in madness, without any consideration of anything else. In fact, the safest way of dealing with a zombie is to set up matchsticks or have danets. I'll use Flaming Jump and Light of Holiness, kiting Mavati. It'll make him want to battle but be completely unable to reach his opponent. He wouldn't escape even if he wanted to. Just send a fireball, and I'll catch up to him. Unfortunately, it's a waste of time, and the situation didn't allow for it. Klein sighed, took out his pocket watch, snapped it open, and checked the time. Seeing that it was almost 9 o'clock in the morning, he turned the handle of the door and walked out of the bedroom. At this moment, Danitz was lying in a reclining chair, producing snores that sounded like a steam engine was operating in the room. He was quite alert, opening his eyes and sitting up as soon as Klein came out. "Are you going out?" Danitz asked when he saw Gehrman Sparrow take off his hat from the coat rack. "Yes." Klein maintained his persona and didn't explain that he was attempting to act by helping someone confess. "What about me? Steel Mavati and his men are almost all dead, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. Even if the newspaper doesn't publish the news, I can spread it myself." There were idle pirates and adventurers who will use it as a material for bragging, spreading the matter to the sea and would end up informing Captain. That bunch of dogs hit can't do a thing aside from drink and brag, but even so they still have their uses. Danitz thought for a moment, then he asked while secretly feeling a sense of fear, "Mr. Sparrow, can I leave now?" Klein revealed a faint smile. "You have always been free." "That's right. I wasn't caught by him this time. I was just looking for help. I have always been free." Danitz was stunned for a moment. Then he was delighted. But right at that moment, he heard Gehrman Sparrow's voice lightly fleeting towards him. "But that ends now." What?" Danitz looked confused. It took him no less than 3 seconds to understand what Gehrman Sparrow meant. He had been captured again. Why? Danitz asked angrily and aggrieved.
Klein put on his hat and said in a low voice, "I want to meet your captain." Danitz widened his eyes, stood up abruptly and shouted out, "What do you want?"
"This fellow is a little too agitated." Klein replied calmly, "I have some things to ask her." Chapter 531. Great acting. He has some things to ask, Captain? Danitz frowned as he watched Gehrman Sparrow leave the room, unsure what his real motive was. What is this fellow really after? Money, riches? But he had the time to take away the heads of Steel Mavady and Blood Brambles Hendry to exchange for nearly £10,000 in bounty rewards. Yes, even after paying any commissions, it would still be £7,000 to £8,000. Yet he didn't do so. Moreover, he generously shared the spoils of war with me. This is very contradictory. When he first heard that I was blazing, his first reaction was to call me a £3,000 bounty. In Captain's words, this isn't scientific. Why would he deliberately give up the bounty? Unless he has a better way to claim it safely, or he had specially left it for someone. Yes. He had been prepared for the appearance of the mandated punishers. He has his own connections and information channels. This way everything can be explained. There's also the possible existence of the demigod that killed Kalangos. There's a powerful and secretive organization behind Gehrman Sparrow. Shocked by his own conjecture, Danitz instinctively tried to use his body language to express his feelings, but he forgot that his left arm was still fractured. He immediately grimaced in pain. This made him feel even more terrified. He didn't want his captain to meet such a dangerous and crazy fellow. He even suspected that Gehrman Sparrow's real motive was his captain's £26,000 bounty. In a duel, that lunatic might not necessarily win against captain, and there's still the first mate, second mate, third mate, and a few bosuns. But he has a terrifying organization backing him. You want to hurt captain? Over my dead body. Danitz puffed out his chest, raised his neck, and was filled with a stirring sense of self-sacrifice.
He ran a hand through his hair, gave a long grunt and said to himself, "I'll make further observations."
Perhaps Gehrman Sparrow really only has questions that he wants answered. Subconsciously, he looked around and found both the flying carpet and the shadow cloak. They weren't missing. In other words, Gehrman Sparrow left the things that belong to me behind. Isn't he afraid that I'll take the opportunity to escape? Or did he steal my hair that makes it easy for divination? No, he's a crazy guy. Even if he wishes to use my hair, he would just walk over and extend his hand to pull one out. It's impossible for him to do it secretly. Right, there's a powerful and secretive organization behind him. Perhaps, at this moment, there are people from that organization secretly monitoring me. They're waiting for me to leave, waiting for me to seek out Captain. How insidious. Gehrman Sparrow must have gone out on purpose.
Danitz felt that he had grasped the truth of the matter thanks to his experience and wisdom.
He paced back and forth before sitting back in the reclining chair. He then thought with a silent, mocking smile. I'm not leaving. I want to see what you can do. I will not bring danger to Captain. 3:15 in the afternoon. Saimim Island. This island was also a part of the Rorstad archipelago, but it was the furthest from the City of Generosity, Byam. It took nearly 5 hours on a liner to reach it. On the way, Klein bought a suit with local characteristics and a small suitcase to replace the clothes he changed out of, for a total of 14 soli. They weren't even worth £1. It's really cheap. It's just change compared to a complete suit.
Wearing pantaloons, a thick brown jacket, and a light brown cap, Klein disembarked from the liner with a native face that didn't stand out, and he entered some of the old ports on Saimim Island. He had spent time buying clothes and changing his appearance, causing him to miss the 9 o'clock ferry and be put in a situation where he could only take the ferry at 10. Thinking of the expenses he had to pay for this acting, he couldn't help but calculate his current financial situation. The faceless characteristic was sold for £3,825. The pirate bounties net me £3,000. Although I haven't received the £6,825, I can basically include it into my budget as long as Mr. Hangman doesn't get exposed. The leftover cash from Donna and Company's gratuity add up to £255 in bits and pieces. I found £26, 11 soli,
and 8 pence from Steel Mavadi's body. Yes, there's still the 5 gold coins as reserves. I haven't spent much money recently, only spending slightly more than £1 in total. This is something to be happy about. With that, I'll have £7,110. Moreover, I still have the Nightmare Beyonder characteristic and the Murloc's bladder. They're still worth something. On second thought, I earned a £3,000 bounty with a Zombie Beyonder characteristic. The latter is worth about £3,000 to £5,000. That is to say I earned about £7,000. This is only from Steel Mavadi, Blood Brambles Hendry, and Squall. Besides, there was quite a lot of waste. Indeed, hunting pirates is quite a good job. It can administer justice, punish the evil, protect the weak and innocent, and also make me rich overnight.
Klein subconsciously turned his head to the side, only to see that the color of the seawater was much clearer than that of Byam's.
It was as if the seawater was a huge, green, sparkling gem, reflecting golden rays under the sunlight. Sure enough, it's not without reason that generations after generations of adventurers have gone out to sea to search for wealth. Even if I deduct the remnant spirituality of ancient wraiths, eyes from a 6-winged gargoyle, spring water from Sonia Island's golden spring, and other supplementary ingredients of a nimble right master, the money I have left will be enough to allow me to buy a decent manor here, in Desi Bay, in the southern continent's colonies, and in the non-metropolitan areas. Lone's countryside is said to be very beautiful, and if it turns out that I'm really unable to return, I can consider settling down in a similar place. Yes, I still have a 10% stake in the Backlund Bike Company, and my future returns won't be low. With confidence, Klein straightened his back and thought about the future. After letting his thoughts wander, Klein began to think about the more realistic question, which was whether he should sell the Nightmare Beyonder characteristic, find an opportunity to return it to the Church of Evernight, or create a mystical item with it through an artisan. It depends on the situation. The ideal solution would be to sell it to the church. The martyr Klein, who had taken 2 potions from the Nighthawks, thought with uncertainty. At the same time, he hoped that Little Sun would soon reach Sequence 7 and be qualified to gain clearance to the methods used to remove the mental corruption from a Beyonder characteristic. As for the matter of releasing the Priest of Light from the glove, he wasn't in a hurry. Little Sun had just received the potion formula for Sequence 7, so he had no need for it at the moment. He would have to wait for a long time, and the powers of a Priest of Light was very effective in dealing with a pirate like Admiral of Blood in a way that was far more potent than the Sun Brooch. As his thoughts slowly settled down, Klein entered the small port town. The place was basically filled with natives. Their skin was nearly bronze, and their black hair had slight, natural curls. Their bodies emitted a scent that was derived from prolonged contact with spices. After changing his appearance and asking about Rain's situation and if there was any news of Went's death, Klein found a secluded corner. He wiped his face with his hand, turning his face into a tall, thin Went with rather distinct facial features. He carried his suitcase and circled around the town to its border. It was then that he saw the winery run by Rain's family. The girl with flaxen-colored hair could no longer be called a young girl. She had obviously matured a lot compared to what Went remembered. She was sweeping the entrance, and there was no one around. Phew! Klein took a deep breath and slowly let it out, feeling as though he was placed in a very difficult position. As a powerful keyboard warrior, he knew about theories like method acting and experimental acting, but he lacked further understanding. He could only try to guess at Went's mood and performance in this kind of scenario. Finally, he closed his eyes and walked over. Rain looked up when she heard footsteps, finally identifying the visitor. She opened her mouth slightly and let out a half-surprised exclamation before saying with a straight face, "Why are you suddenly back?" "Remember, you're just acting." Klein revealed a smile. "I came to bid you farewell." He spoke in a local dialect, with a somewhat nondescript Byam accent. The language of the Rorstad archipelago was also derived from ancient Faisak and belonged to another variant. As a half-historian, Klein was able to master it easily, and it only took him a short time to master it. "Farewell?" Rain asked, slightly surprised. Klein turned his head, looked to the side, and smiled. "I'm going to chase after a treasure trove, and I don't know when I'll be able to come back. When the time comes, I'll appear with a great deal of money. I'll buy a manor in the suburbs, plant some rubber trees, set up a vineyard, have my own mill, wine cellar, blacksmith shop, and let the air be filled with the scent of all kinds of spices. Then, I'll buy a few slaves and hire some servants, just like those masters. Heh, but I'll still be short of one thing.
He overcame his goosebumps that were about to form on his skin, and he turned to look Rain in the eye.
I still lack a wife and a mistress for the manor. Rain, I like you. I wish to marry you.
The reason I said it out loud today isn't to get an answer, but because I'm afraid that I would never have the chance to tell you again.
After listening quietly, Rain suddenly scolded angrily. Went, you're a coward. Ah, this reaction isn't right.
Klein deliberately revealed a surprised expression.
Rain suppressed her voice and said, 3 years ago, 3 freaking years ago, I was already prepared to head to Bayam with you. Yet, you didn't say anything in the end. You coward. You chicken. What's the use of telling me now? You're going to see soon, and you may never come back. The more she spoke, the more agitated she became. You've said it out loud and become happy. You have no regrets, but what about me? I'll have to constantly think about you returning and live on in pain? You selfish bastard.
She waved the broom in her hand and swung it towards Went. Klein knew that the real Went would have hit the broom away, hugged the girl, and tell her that he wasn't going out to sea again, but he couldn't do the same. He had to pretend to be chased away pathetically, running all the way to a nearby alley. There, he hit his head against the wall while silently cursing himself. It was too fucking awkward. This is too fucking awkward. Rain went back to the door, picked up a broom, and crouched down. Her face was ashen. It was unknown what she was thinking about. Vaguely, she heard a sound, and she fell asleep. After using the charm, Klein turned around and nudged Rain, who was sitting on the ground while leaning against the wall. Then he quickly left the area, hiding in the distance to peep at the results. Rain quickly woke up and realized that she had fallen asleep without knowing it. Everything that had happened just now appeared like a dream. She remained sitting there, motionless for quite a while. Suddenly, she lowered her head and let out a sharp curse that seemed to come from the depths of her throat. Went, you selfish bastard. Sigh. Klein, who felt a tiny sensation of digesting his potion, sighed, changed his appearance, and left the place. He would have to spend the night on Saimim Island, as there were no liners headed for Bayam until the morning. Chapter 532, Lord Caucasian. After changing his face and turning into one of the 2 main streets, Klein went straight to the green mailbox and took out a letter he had prepared long ago from his pocket. This was a death notice he had forged as an imitation of an official police document. It was sent to the sergeant of the town of Saimim Haba. It was about the sudden death of the local resident, Went, in Bayam. When deciding to do the acting, Klein had worked out a plan to keep things on track and not cause irreparable damage to the girl, Rain. His plan was to use the slumber charm to camouflage the real acting as a dream. This way, if Rain had no love for Went, he expected her to directly reject his confession. After hearing about the other party's death, she wouldn't feel any guilt, and at most some fear. In response to this, she could effectively be placated by going to church to pray and confess. If Rain also liked Went and responded to the confession, then the dream would give Klein a chance to extricate himself from the situation. The notification of Went's death would kill Rain's expectations, and it wouldn't have too negative an impact on her future life. But even so, it's still a bit cruel. No matter what kind of woman she is, facing the situation of a guy confessing to her in her dreams after his death is definitely going to be heartbreaking. She wouldn't be able to recover for a long time. Well, if I didn't do anything, and when the news of Went's death reaches her, Rain would definitely feel very sad even if it might not be that serious. However, that knot in her heart would never be able to be mended, and she would be stuck wondering for the rest of her life whether Went had gone out on an adventure to pursue his and her future, or if he simply didn't like her. It's not a bad way to end things like this. Once she has overcome her pain, she will carry that gentleness of having been truly loved once while leading her future life. Say. Regardless, to forcibly interfere in the lives of others for acting, having an impact on an innocent person's life to a certain degree, even though I'm using the excuse of fulfilling a wish, it's not a truly kind thing to do. Just like Roselle said, the further one proceeds in the beyonder pathway, the more twisted and evil it feels. The acting method might not be a catalyst. All I can do is try my best to minimize such effects. After sending the letter, Klein exhaled, and with a native face that didn't stand out, he walked to the only inn in town. Along the way, he summed up his previous experience,
which was that disguising yourself as someone else and obtaining feedback was likely a main clause of the faceless principles, second only to you can disguise yourself into anyone, but you are ultimately yourself. If it were any other faceless, they would have blocked out information about Wen's death for the sake of this role. They would have agreed to Rain's confession and spent 1 to 2 years in a relationship with her, marry her, and have children with her, and then, to not be bound by the various relationships in this identity, remember who they were and leave coldly. If there was no exposure during this process, the potion would mostly be digested. But I really can't do it. It's just completely against my conscience. I can only try to push the envelope. Klein sighed, inexplicably afraid. He shook his head and thought in a silent self-deprecating manner, Beyonders not only have to constantly fight against threats and madness, but also fight against all kinds of evil thoughts, as well as the corruption that pulls one down and can cause one to fall if they aren't careful. Even so, at the end of the day, one might still be corrupted by the abyss, becoming a monster that one swears to get rid of. Sigh. Suppressing his thoughts, Klein stepped into the inn and said to the boss behind the counter, "An ordinary room." The thin boss looked up and gave a glance, saying, "A valid ID certificate." "How can a face I just came up with have one?" Klein smiled in embarrassment. "I forgot to bring it." "Then you cannot stay here. This is the rule of our town." The boss once again lowered his head and calculated his income and expenditure for the day. Klein took out a solely note and pushed it over as if nothing had happened. The boss's eyes suddenly widened. No, put it away. I don't want to be locked up by the sergeant." Get out, you dirty bastard with no proof of identity." Klein was thrown out of the inn in shock, unable to believe that the omnipotent entity known as money had just lost its power. After a few seconds of silence, he turned into an empty alleyway, turning back into Gehrman Sparrow with stark facial features. Klein returned to the inn, tapped on the counter, and said Loanese in a Backland accent, "A room." The boss looked up and immediately put down the things in his hand. He then stood up and nodded with a smile. Okay. Do you need a room with a view of the sea, or something quieter?" He switched to a clumsy Loanese that had a thick accent that resembled that of the land of spices, with no further mention of identification. "This really is a pragmatic world." Klein silently lampooned and politely responded, "Quiet." Yes, immediately," the boss responded hurriedly. Then he called an attendant, took the keys, and led Klein personally to the second floor. "Sir, how many days will you be staying?" "It's 1 solely 5 pence a night." Just tonight. Klein couldn't stand the enthusiasm, so he answered succinctly. At the Wind of Azure Inn, his luxurious suite with Danitz was 5 solely a night. Without a doubt, the room the boss had chosen was clean and tidy, and there was no trace of the usual humidity in a harbor inn. Klein looked around and nodded in satisfaction. "Excellent. It's my honor," the boss flattered with obvious fear. Klein put down his luggage, rested for a while. Then he got up and went back down to the ground floor to settle his dinner. Beside the counter, tables were arranged messily on the first floor. There was a greasy layer on their surface, and a fireplace was burning in the corner, giving off light and heat. The Rørsted archipelago was slightly to the south, and the lowest temperatures in winter was only about 10 degrees Celsius. However, for the locals, this was still cold enough that they needed a fire to warm them up. Klein randomly found a seat and sat down, ordering a local specialty of grilled meat and spiced mushroom soup, with the main dish being potato bread. While he was waiting, he swept his gaze over the customers inside the restaurant. His gaze then instinctively landed on a lady. This lady had a head of simple tied-up black hair and a pair of distinctive greenish-gray eyes. Her appearance was the type that one would never get sick of easily, and the more he looked at her, the more intrigued he became. She was obviously not a native, but she was wearing a man's shirt and a thick tan jacket. By her hand was a round-brimmed hat with a depression in the middle. This was one of the more common adventurer outfits out in the sea. At her table, the 3 other men were the same, and they clearly appeared to have been exposed to the elements. Klein had never hid his appreciation of beautiful ladies, but his attention wasn't drawn to her by her appearance. The sea had a strong sense of discrimination against females. Women who could achieve a certain status among adventurers and pirates were either very scheming, very powerful, or both. They were people that one needed to be cautious and wary about. Their boots have some fresh mud on them. Did they just come back from the forest? Haha, they really are adventurers. Klein made a preliminary judgment based on some clues. If these 4 adventurers came by ferry from Byam, even if they had previously stepped on sewage or mud, the traces would have already dried up. Furthermore, as the town hadn't rained in the past 2 days, overall, the roads were quite clean with only some dust. Eliminating the 2 possibilities, it could only be explained that they had returned from a trip to the woods on the outskirts of the town. Klein had heard that many adventurers went deep into the primitive forests of the colonial islands in search of abandoned, forgotten pagan temples or altars, which often contained gold and jewels of ancient worship, but were later buried for various reasons in a place that no one knew of. In the bars of the islands, there was no shortage of legends that someone had managed to make a fortune overnight on an adventure into the woods. There might be evil spirits lingering in those places. It would be better to hunt pirates, or for one to at least acquire the relevant information in advance. Klein retracted his eyes and concentrated on waiting for the food. The 7 churches classified the various gods believed by the colony's primitive faiths as evil spirits, but Klein believed that some of them were natural spirits. After a while, the specialty grilled meat was served. It had been sliced into many smaller pieces and strung onto a wooden stick. The surface was smeared with a reddish-brown sauce. The fragrance was rich and the color was alluring. It looks a little like the kebabs from my previous life. In Lone, they're usually roasted as huge chunks of meat. Only after the meat is roasted would the chef slice up the meat. The method used here makes the flavors infuse the meat better. Klein picked up the wooden stick and bit down on a piece of meat. He felt the meat's juice slightly overflow, and there was a hint of sweetness in the salty fragrance. It's my type. He nodded in satisfaction. Klein enjoyed the meal and even tasted the local Gurney sap, a special beverage, like lemonade with sugar and milk. He went back to his room. Because he had been hunting the night before, he hadn't slept at all. He washed up early, put out the fireplace, and got into bed. Sleeping too early meant one problem. He would wake up in the middle of the night to pee. Klein's dream was interrupted. He opened his eyes and slowly accumulated the courage to lift his quilt. In the middle of the night, Simeon was about 8 to 9 degrees Celsius, and it was enough to make it feel sufficiently cold. After lying still for a while, Klein stretched out his arm and silently withdrew it. He contemplated for a few seconds before reaching out his hand again and picking up the sun brooch from his bedside table. Although it only provided the feeling of a hot summer on a spiritual level, and it didn't produce any actual heat, it could at least deceive himself into thinking that it wasn't cold. Klein got out of bed and headed for the washroom. He narrowed his eyes to ease the pressure on his lower abdomen. When he was done, he pulled up his pants and was about to wash his hands when his spiritual perception was triggered. Klein frowned slightly and looked up at the vent in the bathroom. Suddenly, something black and slippery dropped and hung there. It was a venomous snake extending its forked tongue. Klein was startled. He opened his mouth and shouted, "Bang!" The snake was miserably hit, and it split in half. What happened? Klein stared at it for a few seconds. Seeing no further movement, he walked out of the bathroom and pulled a gold coin from his pocket. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.